You've been taught that holding on is strength, that loyalty means never walking away, that if you care enough, try enough, sacrifice enough, things will eventually change. But if that were true, why do so many people stay stuck in relationships that drain them? Why do you still carry dreams that stopped growing years ago? Why do you keep pouring your energy into situations that give nothing back? The truth is this: not everything in life is meant to be saved. Some things are meant to end. Some paths are meant to close. And some people are only meant to walk beside you for a season. Buddhist wisdom teaches a powerful truth most people never learn in time. Peace begins the moment you stop watering what no longer grows. Because every drop of attention, every ounce of emotional energy you give to dead soil keeps new life from appearing in your world. For centuries, Buddhist teachers have explained that suffering is not created by loss. It is created by attachment, by the quiet habit of holding on long after life has already moved on. Tonight, as you listen to these lessons, something inside you may begin to shift. The weight you have been carrying will start to loosen. Your mind will become quieter. Your heart will feel lighter. And slowly, you will begin to see which parts of your life are truly alive and which parts you have simply been afraid to release. It will feel like fog clearing after a long night. And when you wake up tomorrow, you may notice something surprising: a calmness, a clarity, a quiet strength that comes from finally understanding when to nurture and when to let go. This is not just another audio to fall asleep to. This is a quiet awakening, a moment where you learn the wisdom of stopping the endless watering of what no longer grows. Are you ready? Let's begin. Something quiet begins to happen the moment a person starts looking honestly at their life. The mind slowly realizes that not everything being carried still belongs there. Some things stopped growing long ago, yet the hands keep watering them out of habit, hope, or fear. And this is where the first hidden lesson appears. There is a strange habit many people develop without ever noticing it. It feels like loyalty. It feels like commitment. It feels like strength. But beneath the surface, it quietly drains life from the person holding on. This habit can be understood as emotional gardening. Emotional gardening is the act of tending to things that have already stopped growing. It happens when someone continues investing time, energy, and attention into a situation that no longer has the ability to flourish. The strange part is that the person doing the watering rarely notices it. From the inside, it feels noble, it feels responsible, it feels like doing the right thing. But the deeper truth is different. In Buddhism, attachment often disguises itself as virtue. The mind convinces itself that staying loyal to something broken is a form of strength. The heart says, "I've invested so much already, I cannot walk away now." And so the watering continues. The relationship that stopped bringing warmth years ago continues to receive emotional energy. The dream that quietly lost its meaning continues to be pursued. The version of oneself that belonged to a different chapter of life is held tightly, even though it no longer fits. It is like standing in a field and watering the same patch of dry soil every day, hoping that somehow, one morning, flowers will suddenly appear. Yet nothing grows, and still the watering continues. This quiet pattern can drain a person in ways that are difficult to notice at first. Energy slowly disappears, motivation fades, emotional exhaustion begins to take root. But the person rarely connects the exhaustion to the act of watering what has already died. Instead, the mind begins to ask different questions. Why am I so tired lately? Why does everything feel heavy? Why does nothing feel exciting anymore? The answer often lies hidden in the soil of emotional gardening. Every human being has a limited amount of attention and emotional energy. Buddhism teaches that attention is one of the most powerful forces shaping a person's inner world. Wherever attention flows, life energy follows, and wherever life energy flows, growth becomes possible. But attention is like water in a garden. When it is poured endlessly into one place, other parts of life begin to dry out. Many people unknowingly create this imbalance. They pour their attention into situations that stopped evolving years ago, while the parts of life that could actually grow receive no water at all. The result is quiet frustration. Deep inside, a person may sense that something is wrong. There is a subtle awareness that life could feel lighter, more alive, more open. But the habit of watering what once mattered becomes so automatic that it continues long after it should have stopped. One reason this happens is the emotional investment people make over time. When someone has spent years caring for a relationship, building a career, supporting a friendship, or maintaining a role in their family, it becomes difficult to step back and ask an honest question. Is this still alive? That question is uncomfortable. It forces the mind to confront the possibility that effort was invested into something that may no longer serve growth. And the human mind strongly resists this realization. Instead, it creates a comforting story. I just need to try a little harder. If I stay patient, things will improve. After everything I've given, I cannot give up now. These thoughts feel hopeful, but they often mask a deeper attachment. The person is no longer nurturing something that grows. They are protecting the story that their past effort must lead to future reward. Buddhist teachings describe this pattern as clinging. Clinging does not always feel dramatic. Often it feels subtle and ordinary. It is the quiet insistence that something must continue simply because it has existed for a long time. But time does not guarantee life. A tree that has dried from the inside cannot return to life simply because it stood for many seasons. Yet emotional gardening convinces people otherwise. In relationships, this pattern becomes especially powerful. Someone may continue giving patience, understanding, and emotional support to a person who has stopped reciprocating long ago. Conversations repeat the same frustrations year after year. Apologies are made, promises are offered, but the pattern never truly changes. Still, the watering continues. Why? Because attachment whispers a powerful lie. It says that leaving means failure. It says that stepping back means giving up. It says that loyalty requires endurance, no matter how barren the soil becomes. But Buddhist wisdom introduces a very different understanding of loyalty. True loyalty supports growth. It encourages life to move forward. It allows transformation to occur naturally. But attachment holds things in place long after life has moved on. In other words, attachment freezes the garden. When someone continues watering dead soil, something important begins to disappear: emotional presence. The mind becomes occupied with maintaining what no longer thrives, leaving little energy to explore what could actually blossom. New friendships may appear, but the person is too exhausted to nurture them. New opportunities may quietly arrive, but the person is too focused on maintaining old commitments. New parts of the self begin to awaken, but they are ignored because the old identity still demands attention. In this way, emotional gardening does not only drain energy, it blocks the emergence of new life. Buddhism places great emphasis on impermanence. Everything in life exists within cycles of beginning, growth, decline, and ending. This rhythm can be seen everywhere in nature. Seasons change, flowers bloom and fade, leaves grow, fall, and return again. Nothing in nature tries to hold on to a single moment forever. Yet the human mind often attempts to do exactly that. It tries to preserve relationships exactly as they once were. It tries to maintain roles that once provided meaning. It tries to protect dreams that once inspired passion. But life does not remain still. And when the mind refuses to acknowledge this movement, suffering quietly grows. The hidden cost of emotional gardening is not simply exhaustion. It is the gradual disconnection from life's natural flow. The person becomes stuck, tending to the past, while the future quietly waits elsewhere. This is why Buddhist teachings encourage awareness rather than blind persistence. Awareness allows a person to observe their emotional investments honestly. It asks simple but powerful questions. Is this situation still evolving? Is there genuine growth here? Does this connection still nourish both people, or am I watering this simply because I always have? These questions do not require immediate answers. They simply create space for truth to surface. And truth often arrives quietly. Sometimes it appears as a feeling of heaviness after certain conversations. Sometimes it appears as the realization that the same problems repeat endlessly. Sometimes it appears as a quiet longing for something new that never seems to arrive. These signals are not signs of weakness. They are signs of awareness awakening. Buddhism teaches that suffering often begins when awareness is ignored. When people silence the small inner voice that notices stagnation, the emotional garden becomes filled with dry soil. The person continues watering, but nothing changes. Over time, this pattern creates a deep form of fatigue. It is not the fatigue of physical work. It is the fatigue of maintaining illusions. The mind grows tired from defending the belief that something must continue even when life itself has already moved on. At some point, however, clarity begins to emerge. A person may slowly realize that loyalty does not require endless sacrifice. They may begin to see that letting something end does not erase the value it once had. A relationship that lasted for years can still hold meaning, even if it no longer belongs in the present. A dream that once guided someone forward can still be honored, even if a new path now calls. A role that once defined identity can still be appreciated, even if life has quietly outgrown it. This shift in understanding is one of the most liberating insights within Buddhist philosophy. Letting go is not destruction. Letting go is recognition. It is the moment someone acknowledges that life has changed and that the garden must evolve with it. When a gardener notices that certain plants have stopped growing, they do not continue watering them forever. They gently clear the space so new life can emerge. This act is not cruel, it is wise. The same principle applies within emotional life. Releasing what no longer grows creates space. And space is one of the most fertile conditions for transformation. Without space, nothing new can take root. But when attention is reclaimed from dead soil, the energy that once sustained stagnation becomes available again. Curiosity returns, possibilities appear, the mind begins to feel lighter. Many people fear this moment because it requires honesty. It requires acknowledging that certain chapters of life have already ended, even if the body is still standing in them. But once that honesty appears, something remarkable happens. Peace slowly begins to grow. Not the peace of perfect circumstances, but the peace of alignment with reality. The person is no longer fighting life's movement, they are moving with it. This is the deeper wisdom hidden behind the simple phrase of letting go. It is not about abandoning everything the moment difficulty appears. It is about recognizing when growth has truly stopped and allowing life to continue its natural cycle. When this understanding becomes clear, emotional gardening changes. Instead of watering out of habit, the person begins watering with awareness. Energy flows toward relationships that nourish both sides. Attention flows toward goals that still inspire growth. Care flows toward parts of life that are alive, responsive, and evolving. And the parts of life that have quietly finished their season are allowed to rest. This shift does not erase the past. It simply stops trying to force the past to become the future. In that moment, the garden begins to breathe again, and slowly, new life begins to appear where nothing had grown for a very long time. The moment a person begins to stop watering what no longer grows, a second realization quietly appears. Something deeper begins to surface beneath the exhaustion and the emotional weight that had been carried for so long. Many people slowly notice that a large part of their energy was not only spent on situations that stopped growing, but also on people they believed they had to fix. This discovery can feel unsettling at first. It touches one of the most deeply rooted beliefs many people carry throughout their lives. The belief that if someone truly cares, they must help others change. The belief that love means guiding, correcting, rescuing, or saving those who seem lost. And this belief often becomes one of the heaviest emotional burdens a person can carry. A quiet question begins to arise once the mind becomes aware of this pattern. Why do so many people feel responsible for the growth of others? This feeling often begins early in life. Many people are taught that helping others improve is a sign of kindness and maturity. Parents try to guide their children, friends offer advice, partners try to support one another through difficult moments. These actions, when balanced, can be healthy expressions of care. But something subtle happens when the desire to help slowly transforms into the belief that someone else's growth depends entirely on one person's effort. At that point, compassion turns into responsibility, and responsibility slowly turns into emotional weight. The person begins to believe that if the other individual does not grow, it must be because they have not tried hard enough to help them. They begin giving more patience, more explanations, more forgiveness, more emotional labor, and with every effort, the hope quietly remains that eventually the other person will awaken, understand, and transform. But what often happens instead is a cycle of frustration. The same conversations repeat, the same behaviors return, the same patterns remain unchanged. Still, the person continues trying. Because the belief remains strong, if I care enough, I can help them change. This belief feels noble, but Buddhist wisdom reveals something important about it. Growth cannot be forced from the outside. Real transformation begins from within the mind of the person who must change. This insight can be difficult to accept, especially for people who care deeply about others. Compassion naturally creates the desire to relieve suffering. When someone sees a friend making destructive choices or a loved one repeating painful patterns, the instinct is to intervene. Advice is offered, support is extended, patience is practiced. But Buddhism teaches that awareness cannot be given to someone who is not ready to see. Awakening is always internal. It happens when a person becomes conscious of their own suffering and decides to walk a different path. No one else can create that moment for them. This truth does not mean that compassion is meaningless. Compassion can offer guidance, kindness, and presence. But compassion cannot replace another person's willingness to grow. When someone tries to carry that responsibility, emotional exhaustion soon follows. Many people find themselves trapped in this exhausting role without realizing it. They become the fixer in their relationships, the listener who absorbs every complaint, the advisor who constantly tries to guide someone toward better choices. At first, this role can feel rewarding. Being needed often provides a sense of purpose. It makes a person feel valuable and important in the life of another. But over time, something begins to shift. The person notices that the problems never truly disappear. The same struggles reappear again and again. The same guidance must be repeated countless times. The same emotional energy must be offered endlessly, and slowly fatigue begins to grow, not because the person lacks compassion, but because the burden they have taken on was never theirs to carry. This is the illusion of responsibility for other people's growth. The illusion convinces a person that if they stop helping, the other individual will fall apart. It creates guilt whenever boundaries are considered. It whispers that stepping back means abandoning someone in need, but Buddhism offers a different perspective. Each individual walks their own path of awareness. No one can meditate on behalf of another person. No one can experience insight for someone else. No one can awaken for another human being. This truth can feel harsh at first, yet it is actually liberating. When a person realizes they are not responsible for forcing another person's growth, they regain control over their own emotional energy. They begin to understand that caring for someone does not require carrying their life on their shoulders. There is a difference between support and rescue. Support offers encouragement when someone is already walking toward change. Rescue attempts to drag someone forward when they refuse to move. This distinction becomes crucial for emotional well-being. Many people unknowingly spend years attempting to rescue those who resist growth. They continue explaining the same insights. They continue hoping the next conversation will finally spark awareness. But awareness cannot be delivered through persuasion alone. The Buddha often emphasized that people must discover truth through their own realization. Teachers can point toward the path, but they cannot walk it for someone else. This is why forcing growth often creates tension instead of transformation. The person trying to help becomes frustrated. The person being helped begins to feel controlled or pressured, and eventually both individuals experience emotional strain. Instead of healing the relationship, the attempt to force growth creates distance. Another hidden danger of this pattern is that it slowly erodes personal peace. When someone constantly focuses on correcting others, they lose the ability to focus on their own inner development. Their attention becomes consumed by another person's behavior. They analyze every decision, they worry about every mistake, they feel responsible for every setback. And while all of this emotional energy is directed outward, their own growth quietly pauses. This is another reason Buddhist teachings emphasize self-awareness. When individuals invest all their attention into guiding others, they forget that the most meaningful transformation begins within themselves. The Buddha never told people to fix the world before understanding their own mind. Instead, he taught that personal awakening naturally influences others through example rather than control. When someone develops inner peace, patience, and clarity, others often notice. Not because they were forced to change, but because they became curious about the source of that calm. This kind of influence is powerful precisely because it is not imposed. It invites rather than pressures. It inspires rather than commands. And most importantly, it respects the freedom of others to grow at their own pace. Respecting that freedom is an essential part of letting go. When a person releases the illusion that they must change others, they also release the frustration that comes with unmet expectations. They stop measuring their success by someone else's transformation. They stop feeling responsible for choices they did not make, and slowly, emotional space begins to return. This does not mean they stop caring. It simply means their compassion becomes healthier. Instead of trying to reshape another person's life, they become present when support is genuinely welcomed. Instead of pushing advice constantly, they speak when the other person is ready to listen. Instead of carrying someone else's emotional weight, they allow each person to learn through their own experiences. This approach requires patience and humility. It acknowledges that life itself often becomes the greatest teacher. Sometimes people must face the consequences of their choices before they become open to change. Interfering too early can even delay that realization. By stepping back, a person allows reality to reveal its lessons naturally. This understanding transforms the way relationships function. Instead of becoming a battlefield of correction and resistance, the connection becomes a space of respect and honesty. Each person becomes responsible for their own awareness. Each person learns at their own pace, and the emotional burden that once filled the relationship begins to fade. Another powerful benefit emerges when this illusion dissolves. Self-respect grows stronger. Many people who constantly try to fix others gradually neglect their own needs. They become so focused on helping that they forget to ask whether their own life feels balanced. When they finally step back from that role, they begin to rediscover their own priorities. They remember the goals they once had. They reconnect with the parts of life that bring them energy. They begin investing their attention in growth that actually responds. This shift often feels like reclaiming lost time. Energy that was once drained through endless attempts to change others becomes available again. Creativity returns, motivation returns, emotional stability returns. The person becomes lighter, and something surprising begins to happen. When people stop trying to control others, relationships often improve. The tension that once existed disappears. The other person no longer feels pressured to defend their choices. Conversations become calmer. In some cases, the absence of pressure even encourages the other individual to reflect more deeply on their own behavior. Not because they were pushed, but because the emotional environment became safe enough for self-awareness to emerge. This quiet transformation reflects the wisdom of non-attachment. Non-attachment does not mean indifference. It means caring without clinging. It means offering kindness without trying to dominate another person's journey. It means understanding that every human being must awaken in their own time. When this wisdom becomes part of daily life, emotional exhaustion begins to fade. The constant effort to guide others relaxes. The mind becomes quieter. And the person finally recognizes something that had been hidden for a long time. They were never meant to carry another person's growth. They were only meant to walk their own path with awareness. This realization marks another step in the process of letting go. First comes the awareness that not everything in life continues to grow. Then comes the deeper understanding that not everyone is ready to grow at the same time. And when these truths settle gently into the mind, a quiet sense of freedom begins to emerge. Life no longer feels like a garden that must be managed endlessly. Instead, it begins to feel like a landscape where each person cultivates their own soil. Some seeds grow quickly. Some seeds take years. Some seeds never sprout at all. And that is simply part of the nature of life. The moment someone accepts this truth, their compassion becomes wiser, their boundaries become clearer, and the emotional burden of fixing the world slowly falls away. In that space, something valuable finally returns: peace. When the mind finally begins to release the weight of trying to change other people, a new layer of awareness quietly rises to the surface. The emotional energy that was once spent fixing others starts to return inward. With that return of attention, something unexpected becomes visible. Many people discover that the hardest thing to release was never another person at all. The hardest thing to release is often a version of themselves. There are moments in life when a person begins to feel a strange tension inside. Nothing dramatic has happened. The world may look the same. The relationships may still exist. The routines may continue exactly as they always have, yet something within feels tight, almost like wearing clothes that no longer fit. At first, the feeling is subtle. It appears as restlessness, a quiet dissatisfaction that cannot easily be explained. A sense that life has stopped expanding in the way it once did. And slowly, a difficult truth begins to appear. Sometimes what has stopped growing is not a relationship or a situation. Sometimes it is an identity. Human beings build identities gradually over time. Each experience adds a new layer to the story of who they believe they are. Careers become identities. Roles within families become identities. Talents, achievements, and even past struggles begin to define how a person sees themselves. At one point in life, these identities often feel empowering. They provide direction and purpose. A person becomes the responsible one, the successful one, the helper, the strong one, the caretaker, the leader, the problem solver. These identities help individuals navigate the world. They give meaning to actions and decisions. They become the framework through which people understand their place in life. But identities, like everything else, exist within the flow of change. What once supported growth can eventually begin to restrict it. A career that once provided purpose can slowly turn into a cage when passion fades. A role within a family can become suffocating when expectations remain frozen while life continues evolving. Even the belief that someone must always be strong can become a quiet prison when vulnerability is needed for healing. The strange part is that many people do not recognize when this transformation occurs. They continue carrying identities that belong to earlier chapters of life, even when those roles no longer reflect who they are becoming. This happens because identities create psychological safety. When a person knows who they are, even if that identity brings pressure or limitation, it still feels familiar. Familiarity creates comfort. The mind prefers certainty, even if that certainty no longer leads to growth. Letting go of an identity can feel like stepping into empty space. The mind asks unsettling questions. If I am no longer this person, then who am I? If I leave behind this role, where do I belong? If the identity that once defined me disappears, what remains? These questions create fear because identities often become intertwined with self-worth. People begin to believe their value comes from maintaining certain roles or achievements. The person who has always been the provider may fear losing significance if that role changes. The individual who built their life around a particular career may feel lost when their passion fades. Someone who has always been the one others depend on may feel guilty stepping back from that responsibility. Buddhist teachings offer profound insight into this struggle through the concept of impermanence. Impermanence means that nothing remains exactly the same forever. Every aspect of existence moves through cycles of transformation. Seasons change, bodies age, relationships evolve, and circumstances shift constantly. Yet the human mind often resists this natural movement. Instead of flowing with change, it clings to familiar forms. It attempts to preserve identities long after life itself has begun moving in a different direction. This resistance creates suffering, not because change is harmful, but because attachment prevents adaptation. When someone clings to an outdated identity, they are essentially trying to remain the same person in a world that continues changing around them. The tension between internal resistance and external change creates emotional strain. At first, this strain appears as dissatisfaction. A person may begin feeling disconnected from their daily routines. Activities that once felt meaningful may begin to feel mechanical. Achievements that once brought pride may suddenly feel empty. But because the identity is still tightly held, the person tries to push through the discomfort. They double down on the role they once played. They work harder. They commit more deeply to the image they believe they must maintain. Unfortunately, this effort often intensifies the problem. Instead of resolving the tension, it strengthens the attachment to something that is already fading. The identity becomes a mask that must be constantly protected, even when the person wearing it no longer feels aligned with it. Buddhist philosophy gently reveals that identity itself is fluid. The self is not a fixed object. It is a constantly changing process shaped by experiences, thoughts, and awareness. The person someone was 10 years ago is not exactly the same person who exists today. New insights appear. Values evolve. Priorities shift. Clinging to a past identity ignores this natural evolution. It forces a person to live according to a story that may no longer represent their inner truth. This realization can feel both liberating and frightening. Liberating because it offers permission to grow beyond the limitations of past definitions. Frightening because releasing an identity often means stepping into uncertainty. People may wonder how others will perceive them if they change. They may fear disappointing those who expect them to remain the same. They may even feel as though they are betraying the person they once were. But growth often requires this kind of courage. Releasing an outdated identity does not erase the past. It simply allows the present to evolve naturally. A person who leaves behind a career that no longer inspires them does not lose the skills and experiences they gained. A parent who steps away from a role of constant sacrifice does not stop caring for their family. Someone who softens an identity built around strength does not become weak. Instead, these changes create space for authenticity. The individual begins to align their life with who they are becoming rather than who they used to be. This process requires deep honesty. It asks a person to examine their motivations carefully. Are they continuing a role because it still brings life and meaning? Or are they maintaining it simply because it once defined them? Many people discover that the fear of change kept them attached to identities that had quietly expired. The fear often comes from external expectations. Society frequently celebrates consistency and perseverance, but it rarely encourages individuals to question identities that once brought success. Someone who spent years building a reputation in one field may feel trapped by the expectations of others. Friends, family members, and colleagues may struggle to understand why a person would step away from a role that appears successful from the outside. But external approval cannot replace internal alignment. When someone lives according to an identity that no longer reflects their true direction, the disconnect gradually drains their vitality. This is why Buddhist teachings emphasize awareness of the present moment. Awareness allows individuals to observe their lives without clinging to outdated stories. It helps them recognize when something that once felt authentic now feels restrictive. With awareness, a person can ask a powerful question. Who am I becoming now? This question opens the door to transformation. Instead of defending the past, the mind becomes curious about the future. Instead of protecting an old identity, the individual begins exploring new possibilities. This exploration does not require sudden or dramatic changes. Sometimes the shift begins quietly. A person may begin pursuing interests they once ignored. They may allow themselves to express parts of their personality that had been suppressed. They may release expectations that once shaped their decisions. Slowly, the new version of themselves begins to emerge, and something remarkable happens during this process. Relief appears. The pressure to maintain a rigid identity dissolves. The individual no longer needs to perform a role that feels unnatural. Life begins to feel lighter because authenticity replaces obligation. Another powerful insight arises as well. Letting go of an identity does not mean losing oneself. It means discovering new dimensions of who one can become. Many people who release outdated identities experience renewed creativity and enthusiasm. Freed from the constraints of past definitions, they begin exploring directions they never considered before. This renewal reflects a deeper Buddhist principle. The self is not something to be defended. It is something to be understood and allowed to evolve. Just as a river continuously flows while remaining the same river, human identity can change while preserving continuity. Each stage of life contributes to the unfolding of awareness. The student becomes the professional. The professional may become the teacher. The caretaker may eventually rediscover the freedom to care for themselves. None of these transformations erase the previous stages. They simply reflect the natural movement of life. When a person accepts this movement, they develop a healthier relationship with identity. Instead of clinging to rigid labels, they treat roles as temporary expressions of growth. They understand that identities serve life for a time, but they are not meant to define the entire journey. This flexibility allows the mind to remain open. Instead of resisting change, the person becomes curious about it. Instead of fearing the unknown, they begin to trust the unfolding of their path. This trust does not eliminate uncertainty, but it reduces the suffering created by attachment. The courage to release outdated identities becomes a form of liberation. Each time someone allows themselves to grow beyond an old definition, they reclaim a piece of their freedom. They step closer to living a life guided by awareness rather than expectation, and slowly the person begins to realize something profound. They were never meant to remain the same forever. They were meant to grow. As the mind begins to loosen its grip on identities that no longer fit, another layer of understanding quietly begins to appear. It becomes clear that many of the roles people held onto were connected to a deeper pattern. A pattern so subtle that most individuals never notice it while they are living inside it. The moment someone stops defining themselves by outdated identities, they often realize how much of their life was spent trying to repair what repeatedly fell apart. Not because they enjoyed the struggle, but because the act of fixing had become familiar, almost automatic. And that discovery opens the door to another hidden truth about attachment. There is a strange satisfaction that comes from solving problems. The human mind is wired to seek resolution. When something breaks, the instinct is to repair it. When conflict appears, the instinct is to resolve it. When dysfunction shows up, the instinct is to stabilize it. At first glance, this instinct appears healthy. Problem solving is a valuable skill. It allows individuals to overcome challenges and maintain stability in their lives. But when applied without awareness, this instinct can slowly evolve into something much heavier. It can become an addiction, not the kind of addiction that involves substances or physical cravings, but a psychological addiction to fixing broken situations. This addiction forms quietly over time. A person begins to feel responsible for restoring order whenever something collapses. If a relationship becomes chaotic, they step in to repair it. If a workplace becomes toxic, they try to improve it. If a family conflict emerges, they attempt to hold everyone together. In many cases, this behavior begins with good intentions. The person genuinely wants harmony and stability. They care deeply about the people around them. They believe their patience and effort will eventually transform the situation. But certain environments never truly stabilize. Certain relationships continue repeating the same destructive patterns. Certain systems remain dysfunctional no matter how much effort is invested in them. Yet the person continues trying to repair them. At some point, the mind begins confusing endurance with virtue. The longer someone remains in a broken situation, the more they start believing that staying proves their strength. Walking away begins to feel like failure. Leaving begins to feel like abandonment. So they remain, they keep explaining, they keep forgiving. They keep repairing the same cracks over and over again. This pattern becomes especially powerful in relationships. When two people care about each other but repeatedly hurt one another, the natural instinct is to keep trying. Apologies are exchanged, promises are made. Each conflict is followed by another attempt to rebuild what collapsed. But sometimes the foundation itself is unstable. When the deeper issues remain unaddressed, each repair becomes temporary. The structure appears stable for a short time, only to fracture again later. Despite this cycle, the person trying to fix things often refuses to step away. They believe their perseverance will eventually produce change. Buddhist teachings offer a different perspective on this pattern. The Buddha frequently spoke about suffering that arises from attachment to outcomes. When someone becomes deeply attached to the idea that a situation must improve, they may ignore the reality of what is happening in the present moment. Instead of seeing the situation clearly, they hold on to hope as a form of resistance. Hope in itself is not harmful, but hope that refuses to acknowledge reality can trap a person inside cycles of frustration. The mind keeps saying, "It will get better if I just try one more time." And so the person continues repairing. The deeper reason this pattern becomes addictive is psychological reinforcement. Each time a broken situation briefly improves, even for a short period, the brain interprets that moment as proof that the effort is working. A brief moment of harmony after conflict becomes a reward. A short phase of calm after chaos becomes validation. The person feels relief and tells themselves that all the effort was worth it. But if the underlying patterns remain unchanged, the cycle soon begins again. conflict returns, the situation breaks again, and once again the person steps in to repair it. Over time, the identity of the fixer begins to form. The individual becomes known as the one who holds things together. Friends rely on them to solve problems. Family members expect them to restore peace. Colleagues depend on them to stabilize difficult environments. At first, this role may feel empowering. Being needed can create a sense of importance and purpose, but gradually the emotional cost begins to appear. The person starts feeling drained. They carry stress that does not belong solely to them. They lose the ability to relax because they are constantly anticipating the next crisis that will require their intervention. Their life begins revolving around maintenance. Instead of building something healthy and stable, they spend most of their energy preventing collapse. This is where Buddhist insight becomes incredibly valuable. Buddhism teaches that not every broken situation is meant to be repaired. Some conditions exist because of deeper causes that cannot be solved by one person's effort alone. When a person repeatedly tries to fix something that requires mutual awareness and cooperation, they place themselves in a position where success is impossible. They become responsible for an outcome they cannot control, and that responsibility slowly becomes exhausting. Stepping away from such situations often feels terrifying because it challenges the belief that endurance equals goodness. Society frequently praises individuals who remain loyal through difficult circumstances. Stories of perseverance are celebrated. Sacrifice is often portrayed as noble, but Buddhism invites a different kind of wisdom. Wisdom asks a simple question: is this situation capable of growth? If the answer is no, continuing to repair it may not be compassion, it may be attachment. Attachment convinces a person that walking away is weakness. It tells them that leaving means giving up on something important. But stepping away from a cycle that refuses to change can actually be an act of clarity. It recognizes the limits of personal control. It acknowledges that transformation requires participation from everyone involved. And it protects the individual from losing themselves in endless repair work. This realization can feel uncomfortable because it disrupts long-held beliefs about responsibility. Many people have been taught that caring for others means enduring their destructive patterns indefinitely. But true compassion includes care for oneself. Remaining inside an environment that constantly breaks down can slowly erode emotional well-being. It can create anxiety, resentment, and deep fatigue. Over time, the person may begin losing their own sense of stability. They become so focused on fixing others that their own inner balance disappears. Buddhist teachings emphasize the importance of right effort. Right effort means directing energy toward actions that support growth and understanding. It does not mean exhausting oneself trying to control circumstances that resist change. When someone recognizes the difference between effort and attachment, their perspective shifts. They begin asking different questions. Instead of asking how they can fix everything, they begin asking whether the situation itself is capable of transformation. Instead of measuring their worth by how much they endure, they start observing how their energy is being used. Instead of constantly repairing damage, they consider whether stepping back might allow new possibilities to appear. This shift requires courage because it often involves letting go of the fixer identity. The person who always solved problems may suddenly need to accept that some problems cannot be solved by them. This acceptance can feel like loss at first, but it also creates freedom. When someone stops trying to repair what constantly breaks, their energy begins returning to them. They regain time and emotional space. They rediscover interests and passions that had been neglected. They reconnect with parts of life that actually respond to their effort. This redirection of energy can transform a person's entire experience of life. Instead of feeling trapped in cycles of repair, they begin participating in environments where growth naturally occurs. Relationships become more balanced. Work becomes more meaningful. Personal development becomes possible again. Another surprising effect begins to appear as well. When the fixer steps away, the broken system sometimes reveals its true nature. Without someone constantly patching the cracks, the dysfunction becomes visible to everyone involved. In some cases, this visibility becomes the catalyst for genuine change. The individuals who are relying on the fixer are forced to confront their own responsibilities. In other cases, the system simply collapses completely, but even that collapse can hold important lessons. Buddhism teaches that every condition arises from causes and conditions. When those causes are no longer supported, the situation eventually dissolves. Stepping away does not create destruction. It simply stops sustaining patterns that were already unstable. This understanding removes the guilt that many people feel when they stop fixing everything around them. They realize they were never responsible for holding the entire structure together. They were simply responding to circumstances that required collective awareness. Once that awareness returns to its proper place, life becomes lighter. Instead of carrying endless repair work, the individual begins cultivating environments where growth is mutual. They become more selective about where they invest their energy. They choose connections that evolve rather than repeat. They build foundations that do not require constant emergency repairs, and slowly something powerful begins to replace the old addiction to fixing broken situations. Peace. Peace begins to return when a person stops fixing what constantly breaks. Energy that once disappeared into endless repair slowly flows back into awareness. Life becomes quieter. The mind becomes clearer. Yet with that clarity, another subtle truth begins to surface. Many situations that eventually collapse do not begin with chaos. They begin with silence. Long before relationships become toxic, before workplaces become unbearable, before dreams completely fade, small signals begin to appear. They are quiet signals, easy to ignore, easy to explain away, but they are always there. Buddhist wisdom often points toward the importance of awareness in these early moments, because suffering rarely appears suddenly. It grows slowly, almost invisibly, like a drought that begins with a few days without rain. At first, nothing seems wrong. The ground still looks healthy. The plants still stand upright, but beneath the surface, something begins to change. Emotional droughts follow a similar pattern in human life. They begin quietly, often disguised as temporary discomfort or passing stress. A person may feel slightly disconnected from a conversation that once felt meaningful. They may notice that certain environments leave them feeling drained rather than energized. A relationship may continue outwardly, yet something within it feels repetitive and stagnant. Because these changes happen gradually, the mind often ignores them. People are skilled at rationalizing discomfort. They tell themselves that every relationship goes through difficult phases. They believe that work always becomes stressful sometimes. They assume that emotional fatigue will disappear if they simply push through it. And sometimes these assumptions are correct. Life naturally includes periods of challenge and tension. Growth often requires navigating temporary discomfort. But emotional drought is different from temporary difficulty. Temporary difficulty still contains movement. Emotional drought contains stagnation. When something is still evolving, even painful moments carry a sense of progress. Conversations may be difficult, but they lead somewhere. Effort may be exhausting, but it produces change. Challenges may arise, but they strengthen understanding. In contrast, emotional drought is marked by repetition. The same discussions happen again and again without resolution. The same frustrations appear repeatedly. The same promises of improvement are made, but never truly fulfilled. Everything continues, but nothing develops. This is often the earliest sign that something in life has stopped growing. One of the most common signals appears in conversations. When relationships are healthy and evolving, conversations deepen over time. People share new perspectives, explore different ideas, and learn from one another. But when emotional drought begins, conversations start circling. The same topics return endlessly. The same complaints are repeated. The same disagreements remain unresolved. Instead of expanding understanding, dialogue becomes predictable. Each person already knows how the conversation will end before it even begins. At that point, communication stops being an exchange of growth and becomes a ritual of repetition. Buddhist awareness encourages individuals to notice this pattern carefully, not with judgment, but with observation. When conversations lose their ability to evolve, it often reflects a deeper stagnation within the relationship itself. Another signal appears in the experience of effort. In situations that are alive and developing, effort usually produces visible results over time. A person may invest patience and understanding, and slowly the relationship improves. A professional may dedicate energy to a project and gradually progress appears. But emotional drought creates a different experience. Effort continues, yet nothing changes. The person tries harder, communicates more clearly, offers more patience, yet the outcome remains the same. Eventually, the effort itself becomes exhausting because it no longer leads anywhere. Buddhist teachings describe this as attachment to outcomes without awareness of conditions. When individuals continue investing energy into situations that lack the conditions for growth, suffering begins to accumulate. This suffering does not arrive dramatically. It builds quietly through emotional fatigue. A person may begin feeling drained without understanding why. They may notice a sense of heaviness when entering certain environments. They may experience a loss of enthusiasm for activities that once brought satisfaction. Because the drought develops slowly, many people continue watering the same ground long after it has stopped absorbing nourishment. Another subtle sign of emotional drought appears in the body itself. Human awareness does not exist only in the mind. The body often detects stagnation before the intellect fully understands it. Tension begins to appear in certain environments. Breathing becomes shallow during particular conversations. Fatigue arrives quickly when interacting with specific individuals. These physical signals are often dismissed as stress or tiredness, but they frequently reflect deeper emotional conditions. The body senses when energy is flowing freely and when it is trapped. When environments repeatedly drain vitality rather than support it, the body quietly registers that imbalance. Buddhist mindfulness encourages people to pay attention to these signals, not as definitive answers, but as indicators that something deserves closer observation. Awareness of these early signs can prevent emotional drought from becoming emotional desert. The difference between drought and desert is time. Drought represents the early stage when growth has slowed, but recovery remains possible. Desert represents the final stage where life has completely disappeared from the soil. Many individuals remain in situations long enough for the drought to become desert. Relationships that once had potential eventually lose all vitality. Work environments that once inspired creativity become sources of constant exhaustion. Personal ambitions that once felt meaningful turn into obligations carried out without passion. When this transformation reaches its final stage, people often feel trapped. They may believe it is too late to change direction. They may fear the consequences of leaving environments that have defined their lives for years. But Buddhist wisdom emphasizes that awareness can appear at any stage. Even when a person has spent a long time in emotional drought, recognizing the pattern is the first step toward restoring balance. Recognition requires honesty. It requires acknowledging that something has stopped evolving. It requires observing patterns without immediately trying to justify them. This honesty can feel uncomfortable because it challenges familiar narratives. Many people prefer to believe that persistence will eventually solve every problem. They want to trust that if they continue trying long enough, the situation will transform. But Buddhism invites a different form of courage. The courage to see clearly. Seeing clearly does not always mean abandoning situations immediately. Sometimes awareness simply opens space for deeper understanding. A person may begin noticing the difference between relationships that still contain growth and those that revolve around repetition. They may observe which environments nourish their energy and which environments gradually deplete it. These observations help individuals make wiser decisions about where to direct their attention. Attention is one of the most powerful forces shaping emotional life. Wherever attention flows consistently, energy follows. When attention is directed toward environments experiencing drought, emotional energy gradually disappears into barren soil. But when attention is redirected toward living conditions, vitality begins returning. This shift does not happen overnight. It often begins with small adjustments. A person may start spending more time with individuals who inspire thoughtful conversation. They may pursue interests that stimulate curiosity rather than obligation. They may step back from environments where their effort repeatedly produces no change. These changes gradually restore emotional rainfall. New ideas appear, new connections form, new opportunities begin to emerge. Life begins to feel dynamic again instead of stagnant. One of the most important insights Buddhism offers is that awareness itself changes experience. When individuals become conscious of patterns they once ignored, their relationship with those patterns shifts. Instead of remaining passive participants in emotional drought, they become observers, capable of making intentional choices. They no longer water situations automatically. They evaluate whether the soil still contains life. This shift protects them from reaching the stage where drought becomes desert. It allows them to recognize stagnation early enough to respond with wisdom. Over time, this awareness develops into a form of emotional intelligence. The person learns to sense when conversations are evolving and when they are circling. They recognize the difference between effort that produces growth and effort that simply maintains dysfunction. They begin trusting their perception rather than ignoring it. This trust reduces suffering because it prevents prolonged attachment to situations that cannot flourish. Buddhist teachings often emphasize the importance of right view. Right view means seeing conditions as they truly are, rather than as the mind wishes them to be. When individuals cultivate right view, they stop interpreting drought as temporary inconvenience when it is actually a sign of deeper stagnation. They become capable of responding earlier, before exhaustion becomes overwhelming. This awareness does not make life easier in every moment. Recognizing emotional drought can be painful because it requires accepting truths that were previously avoided. A person may realize that a relationship they hoped would grow has quietly stopped evolving. They may recognize that a path they once pursued with enthusiasm no longer reflects their deeper values. But even painful clarity carries a gift. It prevents wasted years spent waiting for change that never arrives. It restores the freedom to redirect energy toward environments where growth is still possible. And gradually, something beautiful begins to happen. When individuals stop ignoring the signals of emotional drought, they begin cultivating lives that remain alive. Their relationships become spaces of discovery rather than repetition. Their work becomes a channel for creativity rather than obligation. Their inner world becomes open to renewal rather than trapped in stagnation. This transformation does not require perfection. It simply requires awareness. Awareness of when something is still growing and awareness of when the soil has quietly gone dry. When a person finally learns to notice the quiet signs of emotional drought, something important begins to change. Awareness starts replacing habit. Instead of pouring energy endlessly into dry soil, the mind begins pausing, observing, and asking deeper questions. This shift creates clarity, but it also creates another challenge: Many people, once they begin stepping back from draining situations, immediately feel a wave of guilt. The moment they stop trying to repair everything or stop watering what has stopped growing, a voice inside begins to whisper uncomfortable thoughts. It asks whether stepping back means becoming selfish. It suggests that distance means coldness. It warns that letting go might mean abandoning people who need help. This is one of the most misunderstood moments in the journey of letting go. The mind often believes that detachment must mean indifference. It assumes that caring requires constant involvement, constant effort, and constant emotional sacrifice. But Buddhist wisdom introduces a deeper and more balanced understanding of care. It describes something known as compassionate detachment. Compassionate detachment is the ability to care deeply without trying to control the outcome of another person's life. It allows someone to remain kind and supportive while also respecting the natural limits of what they can influence. At first, this idea may feel unfamiliar because many people have been taught that love and responsibility are inseparable. They grow up believing that if they truly care about someone, they must always intervene when that person struggles. But intervention and compassion are not always the same thing. Sometimes intervention helps. Sometimes guidance is necessary. But there are also moments when stepping back is the most compassionate action available. Compassionate detachment begins with a simple realization: every human being is responsible for their own path of growth. No matter how much someone cares, they cannot walk that path for another person. The desire to protect others from pain is natural. Watching someone struggle can be deeply uncomfortable. When a loved one repeatedly makes choices that lead to suffering, the instinct to intervene becomes very strong. But Buddhism teaches that suffering often plays an important role in awakening awareness. Pain can reveal patterns that comfort keeps hidden. Struggle can expose truths that advice alone cannot communicate. When someone constantly rescues another person from the consequences of their choices, they may unintentionally delay that person's learning process. Compassionate detachment recognizes this delicate balance. It allows someone to remain supportive without removing the natural experiences that lead to personal growth. This principle does not mean withdrawing emotionally. Compassionate detachment still includes empathy, kindness, and understanding. The difference lies in the absence of control. A person practicing compassionate detachment does not attempt to reshape another person's life according to their own expectations. They offer care without demanding transformation. This approach requires strong emotional awareness because the urge to control outcomes can be very powerful. When people love someone, they often develop a vision of how that person should grow or change. They imagine what would make that individual happier, healthier, or more successful, and when reality does not match that vision, frustration begins to appear. Compassionate detachment gently dissolves this frustration by shifting attention away from outcomes and toward presence. Instead of focusing on how another person should change, the individual focuses on being present with understanding. They listen without trying to fix every problem. They support without forcing solutions. This presence creates a different kind of connection. In relationships driven by control, conversations often revolve around correction. One person repeatedly offers advice while the other either resists or reluctantly accepts it. But in relationships grounded in compassionate detachment, communication becomes more open. The person offering support is not trying to win an argument or prove a point. They are simply creating space for reflection. This space allows the other individual to examine their own experiences without feeling pressured. Paradoxically, this freedom often encourages deeper self-awareness. When people do not feel controlled, they become more willing to question their own patterns. Instead of defending their choices, they begin exploring them. This shift transforms the nature of compassion itself. Compassion becomes less about solving problems and more about understanding suffering. It acknowledges that each person's journey unfolds at its own pace. It respects the complexity of human growth rather than trying to accelerate it artificially. Another important element of compassionate detachment involves boundaries. Boundaries are often misunderstood as barriers that separate people emotionally. In reality, healthy boundaries protect the well-being of everyone involved. Without boundaries, relationships can easily become imbalanced. One person may begin carrying the emotional weight of another. Over time, this imbalance creates resentment, fatigue, and emotional burnout. Compassionate detachment prevents this dynamic by maintaining clarity about personal limits. A person practicing this principle understands that they cannot be responsible for every problem in someone else's life. They recognize that offering support does not require sacrificing their own stability. This understanding allows them to care without losing themselves in the process. For many individuals, developing this balance requires unlearning long-held beliefs about responsibility. They may have been raised to believe that saying no is selfish. They may feel uncomfortable setting limits on how much emotional energy they give. But Buddhism emphasizes the importance of the middle path. The middle path avoids extremes. It does not promote indifference, but it also does not encourage self-sacrifice that leads to exhaustion. Instead, it invites balance. Compassionate detachment embodies this balance by combining empathy with awareness. It acknowledges the suffering of others while also recognizing that personal peace is valuable. When people neglect their own well-being in an attempt to help others, they eventually lose the energy required to offer meaningful support. Their compassion becomes strained, their patience begins to fade, and the relationship itself may deteriorate under the pressure. Maintaining healthy boundaries preserves the ability to remain compassionate over the long term. It ensures that kindness flows from genuine care rather than obligation. Another aspect of compassionate detachment involves releasing the need for recognition. Many individuals unknowingly expect appreciation for their efforts to help others. When that appreciation does not appear, disappointment follows. Compassionate detachment removes this expectation. The individual offers kindness without attaching their self-worth to the response they receive. They understand that their intention to care is meaningful regardless of how it is acknowledged. This freedom protects them from emotional disappointment. It allows them to act with generosity while remaining grounded in their own stability. Over time, practicing compassionate detachment changes how a person experiences relationships. Instead of feeling responsible for every outcome, they begin appreciating the natural unfolding of each person's life. They celebrate growth when it appears, but they do not take ownership of that growth. They remain supportive during difficult moments, but they do not attempt to remove every obstacle. This approach encourages mutual respect. Each individual becomes responsible for their own awareness while still benefiting from the presence of others who care. In many ways, compassionate detachment reflects a deeper understanding of interconnectedness. Human beings influence one another constantly, but influence does not require control. Simply being present with patience and clarity can create powerful shifts in perspective. When someone models calm awareness, others often feel encouraged to explore that state themselves. This influence happens naturally rather than through force. The beauty of compassionate detachment is that it allows love to remain without becoming possessive. Love continues to exist, but it no longer demands specific outcomes. It no longer insists that another person must grow according to a predetermined path. Instead, it trusts the unfolding of life. This trust does not eliminate concern. Watching someone struggle will always stir compassion. But compassionate detachment ensures that this concern does not transform into anxiety or control. The individual learns to hold space for another person's experience without trying to reshape it entirely. This practice also strengthens personal peace. When someone stops trying to control outcomes, their emotional state becomes less dependent on the behavior of others. They no longer ride the emotional waves created by someone else's decisions. Their stability comes from their own awareness rather than external conditions. This inner stability makes their compassion more powerful. Instead of reacting impulsively, they respond thoughtfully. Instead of becoming overwhelmed by another person's struggles, they remain calm enough to offer genuine understanding. And gradually, relationships begin to feel lighter. Conversations become more honest. Expectations become more realistic. Emotional connections deepen because they are no longer burdened by control. Compassionate detachment reveals that letting go does not mean closing the heart. It means opening the heart in a wiser way, a way that honors both compassion and freedom. A way that allows care to exist without chains. A way that recognizes the beauty of supporting others while also allowing them to walk their own path. And within that balance, something rare begins to appear. A form of love that is both strong and gentle. A form of care that nurtures growth without demanding it. A form of compassion that brings peace rather than exhaustion. When compassion finally becomes balanced with awareness, the heart begins to breathe again. The person no longer feels trapped between caring and exhaustion. They learn that kindness does not require control and that love can exist without trying to shape every outcome. Yet once this balance appears, another deeper layer of understanding begins to unfold. Many people start asking a quiet but powerful question. What happens when something that should have ended is allowed to continue? What happens when a situation has clearly stopped growing, yet the mind refuses to close the chapter? Buddhist philosophy offers a profound answer to this question through the principle of karma. Karma is often misunderstood as a mysterious system of reward and punishment, but in its deepest sense, karma simply refers to cause and effect. Every action, every decision, every pattern of behavior plants seeds that eventually produce consequences. These consequences do not always appear immediately. Sometimes they unfold slowly, spreading outward like ripples across water. The choices people make today quietly shape the conditions they will experience tomorrow. This is especially true when individuals continue situations that no longer serve growth. When a relationship has become stagnant but continues out of habit, a seed is planted. When someone remains in an environment that drains their vitality, another seed appears. When a person keeps returning to the same patterns despite recognizing their harm, the soil of future suffering becomes fertile. The karma of continuing what should end rarely announces itself loudly. It does not arrive with sudden alarms or dramatic warnings. Instead, it grows gradually through repetition. Each time a person chooses to stay in a situation that has stopped evolving, the pattern becomes stronger. The mind begins normalizing the discomfort. What once felt unacceptable slowly becomes familiar. This familiarity can be dangerous because it dulls awareness. A person may begin telling themselves that nothing can change. They may accept conditions that once felt painful as simply part of life. They may stop questioning the patterns that quietly drain their energy. And over time, the seeds planted by these choices begin to grow. One of the most visible karmic effects of refusing to close chapters is emotional stagnation. When someone remains inside a situation that no longer supports growth, their own development begins to slow. Human life is meant to evolve. Experiences shape understanding. New insights lead to different perspectives. But when a person remains trapped in a repetitive environment, their opportunities for transformation become limited. The same conversations occur again and again. The same frustrations appear repeatedly. The same emotional reactions cycle endlessly. Instead of expanding awareness, life becomes a loop. Buddhist teachings often describe suffering as attachment to patterns that no longer reflect reality. When someone refuses to release a situation that has completed its natural course, they attempt to preserve a moment that no longer exists. But time continues moving forward. The mind may cling to what once was, but life itself keeps unfolding. This tension between attachment and change creates the suffering associated with unresolved endings. Another karmic consequence appears in the form of emotional exhaustion. Continuing what should end requires enormous energy. It demands constant mental effort to justify the situation. A person must repeatedly convince themselves that staying is necessary. They must ignore the quiet signals telling them that something is wrong. They must silence the inner voice that suggests a different path may be needed. Over time, this internal struggle becomes draining. The person may feel tired without understanding why. They may experience irritability, sadness, or a loss of motivation. Even moments of rest fail to restore their energy because the deeper source of exhaustion remains unresolved. This exhaustion is not caused by a lack of strength. It is caused by resistance. Resisting the natural ending of something requires continuous effort. It is like trying to hold a door closed while life is gently pushing it open. Eventually, the strain becomes overwhelming. Another karmic ripple emerges in the way unresolved chapters influence future decisions. When someone refuses to close a situation that has already stopped growing, they carry its patterns into the next stage of life. For example, a person who remains in a dysfunctional relationship for many years may unconsciously develop habits of avoidance or self-doubt. These habits do not disappear when the relationship eventually ends. They travel forward into new connections. The individual may struggle to trust their instincts because they spent so long ignoring them. They may hesitate to set boundaries because they became accustomed to tolerating imbalance. In this way, the karma of the past quietly shapes the future. The longer a chapter remains open after its natural ending, the more influence it has over the person's emotional landscape. This is why Buddhist teachings emphasize the importance of mindful closure. Ending something consciously allows the mind to process the experience fully. It acknowledges what the situation offered, it recognizes the lessons learned, and it releases the attachment that would otherwise continue influencing future choices. Without closure, the mind often remains entangled in unfinished stories. People replay old conversations in their thoughts. They revisit past decisions repeatedly, searching for explanations. They carry emotional tension that never fully dissolves. These unresolved narratives create another karmic effect: distraction from the present moment. When attention remains fixed on situations that should have ended, it becomes difficult to fully participate in current experiences. New opportunities may appear, but the person is still mentally connected to the past. Their awareness remains divided. Buddhist mindfulness encourages individuals to observe when their attention is being pulled backward by unfinished chapters. This observation is not meant to create judgment. It simply invites recognition. Recognition opens the possibility of releasing the attachment that keeps the story alive. Another important karmic consequence involves the influence of personal choices on others. When someone refuses to close a chapter that has already stopped growing, they often affect the people around them. Friends and family may notice the emotional strain. They may observe patterns that the individual cannot yet see clearly. Sometimes they offer advice or encouragement to step away from the situation. But if the person continues ignoring these signals, the pattern may begin affecting those relationships as well. Loved ones may feel helpless watching someone remain trapped in a cycle of dissatisfaction. Conversations about the same unresolved issue may repeat endlessly. Over time, the emotional weight spreads beyond the original situation. In this way, the karma of continuing what should end does not remain isolated. It influences the entire network of relationships surrounding the individual. Buddhism teaches that awareness of cause and effect allows people to act with greater wisdom. When someone understands that every choice plants seeds for future conditions, they begin examining their actions more carefully. They ask themselves whether the situation they are maintaining is creating growth or prolonging suffering. This question requires honesty. Sometimes the answer is uncomfortable. Admitting that a chapter has ended can feel like acknowledging loss. It can create sadness or uncertainty about what comes next. But Buddhist philosophy views endings differently. Endings are not failures, they are transitions. Just as seasons shift naturally from growth to rest, life includes periods when certain experiences complete their purpose. Recognizing these moments allows individuals to move forward with greater clarity. Closing a chapter consciously prevents the karmic ripples of stagnation from spreading into the future. It creates space for new seeds to be planted. These seeds may take many forms. They might appear as fresh relationships built on mutual understanding. They might emerge as new creative pursuits or personal interests. They might simply manifest as a deeper sense of peace. The important change lies in the direction of energy. Instead of investing effort into preserving what has already ended, the individual begins nurturing what still holds potential for growth. This shift transforms the experience of life. Energy once consumed by resistance becomes available for exploration. Curiosity returns. Possibility begins replacing repetition. The mind becomes lighter because it is no longer carrying the weight of unfinished chapters. Another beautiful aspect of karmic awareness is the understanding that every moment offers the opportunity to plant new seeds. Even if someone has spent years continuing a situation that should have ended, the moment they recognize the pattern becomes a turning point. From that point forward, their actions can begin shaping a different future. They may choose honesty instead of avoidance. They may choose boundaries instead of endurance. They may choose awareness instead of habit. Each of these choices creates new conditions. Over time, those conditions influence the experiences that unfold. This is the deeper meaning of karma. It is not a system imposed from outside. It is the natural unfolding of cause and effect created by human awareness. Understanding this principle allows people to live with greater intention. Instead of reacting automatically to circumstances, they become conscious participants in shaping their own lives. They recognize when something has completed its purpose. And when that moment arrives, they allow the chapter to close, not with resentment, not with regret, but with the quiet wisdom that endings are sometimes necessary for new beginnings to appear. Within that wisdom, suffering gradually loses its power because the person is no longer clinging to the past. They are planting seeds for a future that is free to grow. When a person begins to understand the karma of continuing what should end, something important becomes visible. They start seeing how every choice quietly shapes the conditions of their future. Awareness begins replacing habit. The mind recognizes the seeds it has been planting, and slowly it begins choosing them more carefully. Yet even after this realization, many people find themselves doing something puzzling. They see clearly that a chapter should close. They understand that the situation has stopped growing. They feel the weight of the patterns they have been carrying, and still they hesitate. They hesitate not because they lack intelligence or awareness, but because letting go opens a door that the mind often fears. Freedom. There is a strange paradox hidden inside human behavior. Many individuals say they want freedom. They say they want peace, growth, and a life that feels open and alive. But when the moment arrives to actually step into that freedom, something inside becomes uncomfortable. A quiet resistance appears. The mind begins searching for reasons to stay where it already is. This resistance reveals an important psychological truth. Familiar suffering often feels safer than unfamiliar possibility. When someone has lived inside a certain pattern for a long time, even if that pattern causes pain, it becomes predictable. The mind knows what to expect. It understands the rhythm of the situation. It knows how to respond to the same conflicts, the same disappointments, and the same emotional cycles. Predictability creates a strange form of comfort. It does not remove suffering, but it removes uncertainty. Freedom, on the other hand, introduces uncertainty. When a person lets go of a situation that once defined their life, they step into open space. The structures that once guided their decisions disappear. The routines that once filled their days may no longer exist. This openness can feel frightening because the mind does not immediately know what will replace what has been released. The unknown becomes visible. Buddhist teachings explain that the mind often reacts to uncertainty with attachment. Instead of embracing change, it clings to what it already understands. Even if the current situation is painful, the mind prefers the security of familiarity. This reaction is not weakness. It is simply how human psychology evolved. For thousands of years, survival depended on recognizing familiar patterns. The brain learned to associate safety with what it had already experienced. Anything new or unpredictable triggered caution. This survival instinct still influences modern emotional behavior. When someone considers leaving a stagnant relationship, their mind may immediately begin focusing on the uncertainty that follows. Questions arise. What if I regret the decision? What if things become worse? What if I cannot find something better? These questions create hesitation. The mind compares two possibilities. On one side is the known situation, even if it brings frustration. On the other side is freedom, but freedom without guarantees. Because the brain is designed to minimize risk, it often chooses the known path. Buddhism recognizes this pattern as a form of attachment rooted in fear. The fear does not always appear as panic. Sometimes it appears as subtle doubt. Sometimes it disguises itself as responsibility. A person might say they are staying because they care about others. They might believe they are being patient or loyal, but beneath these explanations, the deeper reason may simply be fear of the unknown. Freedom requires stepping into uncertainty. This is why clinging can feel so natural. Clinging offers structure. It keeps life within boundaries the mind understands. Even if those boundaries are narrow or painful, they provide a sense of control. Freedom removes those boundaries, and without boundaries, the mind must learn to trust itself. Trust can feel difficult when someone has spent years defining their life through external structures. A job may have provided identity. A relationship may have provided routine. A familiar environment may have shaped daily decisions. When these structures disappear, a person must begin navigating life through inner awareness rather than external patterns. This transition can feel overwhelming at first. Buddhist philosophy describes this stage as a moment of awakening. The individual begins to see how much of their life was shaped by habit rather than conscious choice. Habits are powerful because they simplify decisions. They allow people to move through life without constantly questioning their direction. But when habits no longer support growth, they become obstacles. Clinging to them prevents the emergence of new possibilities. The psychology of clinging becomes even stronger when emotional investment is involved. The more time, effort, and energy someone has invested in a situation, the harder it becomes to release it. The mind begins telling stories to justify the attachment. It reminds the person of the good moments that once existed. It highlights the effort already spent. It suggests that leaving now would mean wasting everything that came before. But Buddhism offers a different perspective. Past investment does not determine future growth. Just because something once held meaning does not mean it must continue indefinitely. Clinging to the past often prevents the present from evolving. Another reason clinging feels safer than freedom is the fear of self-discovery. When external structures disappear, a person must face deeper questions about who they are and what they truly want. Many individuals avoid these questions because they can be uncomfortable. It is easier to continue existing inside a familiar role than to explore a new identity. Freedom requires exploration. It invites a person to discover parts of themselves that may have remained hidden while they were busy maintaining old patterns. For some individuals, this discovery process feels exciting. For others, it feels intimidating. The unknown includes both possibility and challenge. Buddhist mindfulness helps dissolve this fear by encouraging presence rather than prediction. The mind often becomes overwhelmed because it tries to imagine every possible outcome before taking a step forward, but reality rarely unfolds according to these imagined scenarios. The future is not a fixed path waiting to be predicted. It is a field of possibilities that emerges through each decision made in the present moment. When someone practices mindfulness, they learn to focus on the step directly in front of them instead of trying to control everything that might happen later. This shift reduces the fear associated with freedom. Instead of seeing freedom as a vast and uncertain landscape, the person begins viewing it as a series of small moments that can be navigated one at a time. Each step builds confidence. Each experience creates new understanding. Gradually, the unknown begins to feel less threatening. Another important insight emerges during this process. Freedom does not mean life becomes easier immediately. Freedom means life becomes real. Without the constraints of clinging, individuals begin encountering experiences that reflect their authentic direction rather than their past habits. Some of these experiences will be joyful. Others may involve challenges that require growth, but they will belong to the present rather than the past. This distinction is powerful. When someone remains inside a situation simply because it feels safe, they are living according to old conditions. Their life becomes a continuation of patterns established long ago. Freedom allows them to create new conditions. Instead of repeating familiar suffering, they begin participating in experiences that reflect their current awareness. Over time, this shift transforms the way the mind perceives uncertainty. The unknown no longer appears as a threat. It becomes a space where new possibilities can emerge. The person begins recognizing that security built on stagnation is not true security. True stability comes from adaptability and awareness. When someone trusts their ability to navigate change, they no longer need to cling to rigid structures. They can allow life to evolve naturally. This trust does not eliminate fear entirely. Fear may still appear when stepping into unfamiliar situations, but awareness prevents that fear from controlling decisions. Instead of clinging automatically, the person pauses and observes. They notice the impulse to remain inside the familiar. They acknowledge the uncertainty of moving forward, and then they choose their path consciously. This conscious choice is the essence of freedom. Freedom is not simply the absence of constraints, it is the presence of awareness guiding each decision. When individuals develop this awareness, the psychological grip of clinging begins to weaken. The familiar no longer holds the same power over their choices. They begin recognizing when attachment is protecting growth rather than supporting it. And in that recognition, a new kind of courage appears. The courage to step into the unknown, not recklessly, not blindly, but with the understanding that life is meant to move forward. Each time someone releases an attachment rooted in fear, they strengthen their ability to trust the unfolding of their path. The mind becomes more flexible, the heart becomes more open, and gradually the person begins to see freedom not as something frightening, but as something natural, a space where life can continue growing without the limits imposed by past habits. a space where new experiences can arise, a space where the future is no longer defined by the fear of letting go. In that space, clinging slowly dissolves, and what remains is a quiet sense of possibility. When a person finally loosens their grip on what they were clinging to, a strange quiet begins to appear. The patterns that once filled every day with tension, repair, and emotional noise suddenly fade. The familiar struggle disappears. The endless thinking about what should be fixed or controlled slowly dissolves. At first, this moment feels like relief. The mind becomes lighter. The constant pressure to hold something together is gone. But soon after that relief, another feeling begins to surface, and many people are not prepared for it. Emptiness. It arrives quietly, not as a dramatic event, but as a wide-open space where something used to exist. The conversations that once repeated every day are no longer happening. The emotional storms that once demanded attention are gone. The routines built around fixing problems or maintaining fragile situations suddenly disappear. And for many people, this emptiness feels unsettling. The mind begins asking a new set of questions. What now? What fills this space? Why does everything feel so quiet? For someone who has spent years holding on, the silence that follows letting go can feel almost uncomfortable. Life seems slower. The mind is no longer occupied with constant repair or emotional negotiation. This stage is one of the most misunderstood phases of transformation. Many individuals interpret emptiness as something negative. They assume that the absence of struggle means something important has been lost. They may even feel tempted to return to the old situation simply to escape the unfamiliar quiet. But Buddhist teachings offer a very different perspective on this moment. In Buddhism, emptiness is not seen as a void of meaning. It is seen as space where new life can eventually grow. This idea becomes easier to understand when observing nature. A field that has been overworked for many seasons cannot immediately produce new crops. It must first rest. The soil needs time to recover its nutrients. During that resting period, the field may look empty. But that emptiness is not useless. It is preparation. The same process occurs in emotional and spiritual life. When someone releases attachments that once consumed their attention, the mind needs time to recalibrate. Old habits dissolve. Old emotional reactions fade. The identity connected to the previous situation slowly loosens. During this transition, the person may feel uncertain because the next chapter has not yet fully appeared. This uncertainty is natural. For a long time, the mind relied on familiar structures to define daily life. Now those structures are gone. Without them, the person must learn to navigate a new kind of openness. Many people rush to fill this space immediately. They search for new relationships, new commitments, or new distractions as quickly as possible. The quiet feels too unfamiliar, so they attempt to replace it with activity. But Buddhist wisdom encourages patience during this phase. Emptiness has a purpose. It creates the conditions necessary for genuine transformation. If the mind rushes to fill the space too quickly, it may repeat the same patterns that existed before. The person might enter new situations that resemble the old ones because the deeper understanding has not yet fully matured. Allowing emptiness to exist for a time prevents this repetition. It gives awareness the opportunity to deepen. During this period, the individual begins learning how to exist without the constant noise of previous attachments. They rediscover parts of themselves that were hidden beneath the weight of maintaining old patterns. Small experiences begin to feel different. A quiet walk becomes more noticeable. A simple conversation carries more presence. Even moments of stillness start revealing subtle insights about what truly matters. This stage often brings unexpected realizations. A person may begin noticing how much energy they once spent managing emotional turbulence. Without that turbulence, their inner world feels calmer. They may also realize how much of their identity was tied to the situations they released. When those identities fade, a deeper question begins to emerge. Who am I without those roles? This question is not meant to create anxiety. It is an invitation to rediscover the self beyond old definitions. Buddhist teachings often emphasize that the self is not a fixed object. It is a process that evolves through awareness and experience. The empty field after letting go provides the perfect environment for this evolution. Without the distractions of constant repair and emotional entanglement, the mind becomes more attentive. It begins observing thoughts and feelings with greater clarity. Old habits of reaction start dissolving. The person may notice that situations which once triggered strong emotional responses now feel less intense. The absence of constant stress allows the nervous system to relax. Peace slowly becomes familiar. Another important transformation occurs during this period. The individual begins developing trust in life's unfolding process. Before letting go, they may have believed that every situation required active control. They felt responsible for shaping outcomes and maintaining stability. But in the empty field, they discover that life continues moving forward even without constant intervention. New opportunities begin appearing naturally. A conversation leads to an unexpected idea. A quiet moment of reflection sparks a new direction. An interest that had been ignored for years suddenly feels alive again. These developments do not arrive through force. They emerge organically. This organic emergence reflects one of the deepest insights of Buddhist philosophy. Growth happens most naturally when the mind stops interfering with every process. Just as a seed grows quietly beneath the soil, new possibilities develop when the conditions are right. The empty field provides those conditions. It removes the clutter of old attachments so that fresh perspectives can take root. Another gift hidden within emptiness is clarity. When someone is constantly engaged in complicated situations, their perception often becomes clouded. Emotional intensity makes it difficult to see patterns clearly. But in the calm space that follows letting go, the mind can finally reflect on the past with greater understanding. The person may begin recognizing lessons that were invisible before. They might see how certain relationships shaped their boundaries. They may understand how specific experiences revealed their values. Instead of feeling regret about what ended, they begin appreciating the wisdom gained from those chapters. This shift transforms the meaning of loss. What once felt like something taken away now appears as part of a larger journey. Each experience becomes a teacher rather than a burden. Over time, the emptiness that initially felt uncomfortable starts feeling peaceful. The person becomes comfortable with the absence of chaos. They learn that life does not need to be filled with constant activity to feel meaningful. Presence becomes enough. From this calm presence, a new kind of creativity often begins to appear. Freed from old expectations, the mind starts exploring possibilities it previously ignored. Someone who spent years focused on maintaining a difficult relationship might suddenly feel drawn toward personal growth. Another person may rediscover creative interests that were neglected during stressful periods. This creativity is not forced. It emerges naturally because the mental space now exists for exploration. Buddhist meditation practices often aim to cultivate this kind of openness. By quieting the constant chatter of the mind, individuals learn to observe life without immediately reacting. The empty field after letting go resembles this meditative state. It provides a rare opportunity to experience life without the pressure of maintaining old structures. The person becomes more receptive to subtle guidance. They notice which environments nourish their energy. They observe which activities bring genuine satisfaction rather than temporary distraction. These observations gradually shape the direction of their next chapter. Instead of repeating patterns based on habit, they begin making decisions based on awareness. This awareness protects them from rushing back into situations that resemble what they just left. It encourages thoughtful choices. Another powerful change begins to unfold as well. The person develops patience with life's timing. Before letting go, they may have felt urgency to control outcomes. They wanted answers quickly. They wanted stability immediately. But the empty field teaches a different rhythm. Growth does not always appear instantly. Seeds require time beneath the soil before they break through the surface. The same is true for personal transformation. The quiet period after letting go is not wasted time. It is preparation. During this time, emotional resilience strengthens. The mind becomes less reactive. The individual develops a deeper understanding of what truly aligns with their values. When the next opportunity finally appears, they are ready to recognize it. They are no longer driven by fear or attachment. They respond with clarity. Eventually, the emptiness that once felt uncertain becomes something beautiful. It becomes a symbol of possibility. Instead of representing loss, it represents potential. It is the open space where life can begin again without the weight of what no longer belongs. And in that open space, something extraordinary begins to grow. Not forced, not rushed, but naturally, just as life has always intended. The empty field after letting go eventually becomes quiet enough for deeper understanding to appear. When the mind is no longer crowded with the noise of broken patterns and unfinished struggles, it begins seeing things that were once hidden. Many realizations arise during this calm period, but one of the most important truths often appears slowly. People begin to question something they once believed without hesitation. They begin to wonder whether the loyalty they practiced for years was truly loyalty at all. The mind starts noticing that some of the things it protected and defended for so long were not growing, not evolving, and not bringing life forward. This realization can feel uncomfortable because loyalty is one of the most respected virtues in human life. From childhood, people are taught that loyalty proves character. Loyalty to family, loyalty to partners, loyalty to friends, loyalty to commitments. These ideas become deeply rooted in how individuals measure their own integrity. Because of this, many people continue holding on to situations long after they have stopped evolving. They believe they are being loyal. They believe that leaving would mean betrayal. They believe that endurance is proof of love or strength. But Buddhism offers a more precise way of understanding loyalty. True loyalty supports growth. Attachment, on the other hand, protects stagnation. At first, the difference between these two may appear subtle, but once someone begins observing carefully, the contrast becomes clear. Loyalty arises from awareness. It recognizes the value of connection, trust, and mutual care. But it does not demand that something remain unchanged forever. Attachment, however, arises from fear. It resists change even when change is necessary for growth. When loyalty exists in a relationship, both individuals evolve. Conversations deepen, understanding expands, and challenges become opportunities to learn from one another. There is movement within the connection. Each person encourages the other to become more aware, more compassionate, and more honest. Attachment looks similar on the surface, but the internal dynamics are very different. Attachment holds tightly, even when growth stops. It refuses to acknowledge when something has reached its natural conclusion. It protects the idea of the relationship rather than the health of the people inside it. Because attachment disguises itself as loyalty, many individuals do not notice the difference for a long time. They remain inside situations that have become stagnant because they believe leaving would mean abandoning someone they care about. They convince themselves that patience will eventually restore what once existed, but loyalty does not require the denial of reality. A relationship that once brought mutual growth may eventually change direction. People evolve at different speeds. Life circumstances shift. Priorities transform over time. These changes do not erase the value that once existed. However, attachment attempts to freeze that earlier moment. It clings to the memory of what the connection used to be and tries to preserve it indefinitely. When reality no longer matches the memory, tension appears. This tension often becomes visible in the form of emotional exhaustion. One person may continue investing effort, hoping to revive the connection, while the other has already moved in a different direction. The loyal individual begins feeling responsible for maintaining the bond. They may carry the emotional weight of the relationship alone, believing that their dedication proves the depth of their care. But genuine loyalty does not require one person to carry everything. In healthy loyalty, responsibility is shared. Each individual participates in nurturing the relationship. Each person contributes to its growth. There is balance between giving and receiving. Attachment removes that balance. When attachment takes control, one person often becomes the caretaker of the connection, while the other simply remains inside it. Over time, this imbalance creates resentment and fatigue. The person who continues holding everything together may feel unappreciated. They may struggle to understand why their loyalty is not producing the harmony they expected. The reason lies in the difference between nurturing growth and preserving stagnation. Loyalty nurtures what is alive. Attachment preserves what has already ended. Buddhist teachings emphasize awareness as the key to recognizing this difference. Without awareness, the mind tends to romanticize attachment. It tells stories about sacrifice and devotion. It praises endurance even when endurance leads to suffering. Awareness gently challenges these narratives. It asks simple but powerful questions. Is this connection still encouraging growth for both people? Is the effort shared equally? Does the relationship bring clarity and understanding, or does it create confusion and exhaustion? These questions are not meant to assign blame. They simply reveal whether the bond remains alive. When someone begins asking these questions honestly, they may discover that what they believed was loyalty has actually been attachment. This discovery can feel painful at first because it requires reinterpreting past experiences. The person may realize that they stayed far longer than necessary. They may see how fear of betrayal prevented them from acknowledging what was already clear. But Buddhist wisdom encourages compassion during this realization. Every person learns through experience. Attachment often arises from sincere intentions. People cling not because they are weak, but because they value connection deeply. Understanding the difference between loyalty and attachment is part of developing emotional maturity. As awareness deepens, individuals begin relating to others in a healthier way. They stop measuring loyalty by how long they endure suffering. Instead, they measure loyalty by the presence of mutual respect and growth. If a connection continues supporting both individuals, loyalty strengthens it. If a connection becomes stagnant, loyalty may actually require honesty about that reality. This honesty does not mean abandoning people carelessly. It means acknowledging that relationships evolve. Sometimes loyalty involves staying and working through challenges together. Other times, loyalty involves allowing each person to follow a different path. This perspective removes the guilt often associated with letting go. The person understands that releasing a stagnant situation does not erase the care that once existed. It simply respects the natural movement of life. Another important distinction between loyalty and attachment involves intention. Attachment often arises from the desire to protect personal comfort. The mind may cling to a familiar relationship, even if it has become unhealthy, because it fears loneliness or uncertainty. Loyalty, however, arises from clarity. It supports what is genuinely beneficial rather than what feels temporarily safe. When loyalty guides decisions, individuals prioritize truth over convenience. They recognize when a situation requires honest conversation or meaningful change. This clarity protects relationships from drifting into silent stagnation. It encourages both individuals to remain present and aware of each other's needs. Buddhist philosophy also highlights that loyalty does not demand permanence. Everything in life exists within cycles. People enter each other's lives for different reasons and durations. Some connections last a lifetime, others fulfill their purpose within a shorter period. Recognizing this impermanence does not diminish the value of those relationships. In fact, it often deepens appreciation for the time shared. Attachment tries to prevent endings. Loyalty accepts that endings can occur while still honoring the connection. This acceptance creates freedom within relationships. People no longer feel obligated to maintain bonds that no longer support growth. Instead, they cultivate connections based on mutual awareness and care. This freedom leads to healthier emotional environments. When individuals know they are together by choice rather than obligation, the relationship becomes more authentic. Each person remains present because they genuinely want to participate in the connection. There is less pressure to perform roles or maintain appearances. Instead, there is openness to change and evolution. Another subtle transformation occurs as well. The individual who understands the difference between loyalty and attachment begins forming stronger boundaries. These boundaries are not barriers designed to push others away. They are expressions of self-respect. They protect the individual from remaining in situations that diminish their well-being. At the same time, these boundaries create space for healthier relationships to develop. People who respect mutual growth are naturally drawn toward individuals who share similar awareness. Over time, connections built on loyalty rather than attachment tend to feel lighter. They are not maintained through guilt or obligation. They continue because both individuals recognize their value. This recognition creates stability without stagnation. It allows relationships to adapt as life changes, and it encourages honest communication whenever challenges arise. Ultimately, understanding the difference between loyalty and attachment transforms the way a person approaches connection itself. They no longer cling to relationships out of fear. They no longer remain in situations simply to prove devotion. Instead, they cultivate bonds that reflect awareness, respect, and growth. In this way, loyalty becomes something far more powerful than endurance. It becomes a commitment to truth, a commitment to mutual development, and a commitment to allowing life to move forward without forcing it to remain the same. As the difference between loyalty and attachment becomes clearer, another realization slowly begins to surface. The mind starts noticing that some of the effort once described as loyalty or devotion carried another hidden element. Something quieter, something far more difficult to recognize. Many people discover that their kindness gradually transformed into something else. What once felt like compassion slowly became exhaustion. What once felt like care began turning into quiet depletion. The line between helping and losing oneself can be very thin, and many individuals cross that line without ever noticing when it happened. There is a quiet heaviness that appears when compassion begins turning into self-abandonment. It does not arrive loudly. It grows slowly through repeated moments of giving, supporting, fixing, and holding space for others. At first, these actions feel meaningful. Helping someone who is struggling often creates a sense of purpose. Offering guidance, emotional support, or patience can strengthen connection and build trust. Compassion is one of the most beautiful qualities a human being can develop. It allows individuals to recognize the suffering of others and respond with care rather than judgment. But compassion becomes complicated when awareness disappears. Without awareness, the desire to help can quietly shift into a pattern where a person begins neglecting their own well-being. The mind tells them that caring for others should come first. It tells them that their own needs are less important. Slowly, the balance between giving and receiving begins to disappear. This transformation rarely happens intentionally. Most people who enter this pattern do so because they genuinely care. They want to support someone they love. They want to help a friend through difficulty. They want to prevent another person from suffering. But over time, The emotional energy required to maintain this constant support begins to drain their inner stability. They may start noticing that their own peace feels distant. Their thoughts become occupied with solving someone else's problems. Their emotions begin reacting to another person's struggles, as if those struggles belong entirely to them. This is the moment when compassion begins turning into self-abandonment. Buddhist philosophy offers a powerful insight about compassion that many people misunderstand. Compassion does not require sacrificing oneself endlessly. True compassion exists alongside wisdom. Wisdom understands that every individual is responsible for their own awakening. No one can force another person to grow. No one can carry another person's life entirely on their shoulders. When compassion loses this wisdom, it becomes unbalanced. The person continues giving energy even when it produces no meaningful change. They keep offering advice that is never followed. They keep repairing situations that repeatedly collapse. Instead of supporting growth, their effort begins maintaining stagnation. This pattern slowly erodes inner peace. The individual may begin feeling tired in a way that sleep cannot fix. Their mind remains occupied with concerns that do not belong to them. Their emotional state becomes dependent on whether another person is doing well or struggling. When someone lives in this condition for a long time, they often lose connection with themselves. Their own needs become secondary. Their personal goals may be postponed indefinitely. Their inner voice becomes quieter as the focus remains fixed on another person's situation. From the outside, this behavior may appear admirable. Others may praise the individual for their patience and dedication. Society often celebrates self-sacrifice as a sign of virtue. But Buddhist teachings invite a deeper examination. The middle path is one of the central principles of Buddhist philosophy. It encourages balance rather than extremes. This principle applies not only to material desires, but also to emotional and relational life. The middle path teaches that compassion must exist alongside self-respect. If compassion leads to complete exhaustion, something has moved out of balance. A person who constantly abandons their own needs eventually loses the ability to help anyone effectively. Their emotional resources become depleted, their clarity fades. Helping others from a place of emptiness does not create healing, it creates dependency. The person receiving help may unconsciously rely on the constant support instead of developing their own strength. Meanwhile, the person giving help continues feeling responsible for outcomes they cannot control. This dynamic traps both individuals in a cycle that prevents real growth. Recognizing this cycle can feel uncomfortable because it challenges deeply held beliefs about kindness. Many people believe that refusing to continue helping would mean they are selfish or uncaring. They fear that setting boundaries will hurt someone they love, but Buddhism reframes the idea of boundaries. Boundaries are not acts of rejection, they are acts of clarity. When someone sets a boundary, they are acknowledging that each person must walk their own path. They are respecting the natural process of learning through experience. Growth often requires individuals to face the consequences of their choices. If someone continually shields another person from those consequences, the opportunity for growth may never appear. Compassion guided by wisdom recognizes this truth. It continues caring for others while also allowing them to take responsibility for their own lives. This form of compassion feels different from self-abandonment. It does not require constant sacrifice. Instead, it expresses support without attachment to controlling outcomes. The person may still offer encouragement, kindness, and understanding, but they no longer feel obligated to solve every problem or prevent every mistake. This shift creates a healthier dynamic for everyone involved. The individual who previously felt responsible for everything begins reclaiming their energy. They rediscover the importance of caring for their own emotional well-being. They start noticing how their peace returns when they stop carrying burdens that were never theirs to hold. At the same time, the other person gains the opportunity to develop independence. Without someone constantly repairing their situation, they may begin exploring their own capacity for change. This process may take time. Sometimes the individual receiving help initially reacts with confusion or frustration when boundaries appear. They may have become accustomed to relying on external support, but boundaries do not remove compassion. They simply redefine how compassion is expressed. Instead of sacrificing oneself endlessly, the person begins offering support that respects both individuals. This balanced form of compassion often creates stronger relationships. Each person remains responsible for their own growth while still caring about the other's well-being. The emotional burden becomes lighter because it is no longer carried by one person alone. Another transformation begins to unfold as well. The individual who previously abandoned themselves starts reconnecting with their own inner life. They may rediscover interests they neglected while focusing on someone else's struggles. They may notice how much peace exists when their mind is not constantly occupied with fixing problems. Self-awareness deepens during this period. They begin recognizing the signals that indicate when compassion is becoming unhealthy. They notice the early signs of exhaustion. They observe when their thoughts become consumed by another person's choices. These observations allow them to respond with balance rather than slipping back into self-abandonment. Over time, they develop a new understanding of kindness. Kindness does not mean ignoring one's own well-being. Kindness includes the self. When someone learns to care for their own emotional health, they become more capable of offering genuine support to others. Their compassion becomes grounded rather than desperate. It arises from a place of inner stability rather than fear of disappointing someone. This stability changes how they interact with people around them. They listen without absorbing every emotional struggle as their responsibility. They offer advice when asked, but they do not feel compelled to control another person's path. They remain present while also honoring their own limits. This balance reflects the middle path. The middle path does not reject compassion, and it does not encourage selfishness. It invites awareness. It teaches that healthy relationships grow when each person maintains responsibility for their own life while supporting one another with respect. When compassion returns to this balanced state, inner peace begins restoring itself. The constant tension between giving and exhaustion disappears. Helping others becomes an act of choice rather than obligation. And in that freedom, compassion regains its original purpose. Not as a force that drains life away, but as a gentle presence that supports growth without losing itself in the process. When compassion finally returns to balance, something else begins to unfold inside the mind. The person who once gave endlessly without protecting their own peace slowly begins seeing relationships with clearer eyes. The pressure to hold everything together disappears, and in that calm space, a quiet truth begins to reveal itself. Not every connection in life is meant to last forever. This realization can feel surprising at first because many people grow up believing that meaningful relationships must be permanent. Society often measures the value of a connection by its duration. The longer something lasts, the more important it appears. But life does not always follow this idea. Many of the most powerful relationships people experience do not stay for a lifetime. Some appear suddenly, bring growth, offer lessons, and then quietly fade when their purpose has been fulfilled. Understanding this truth requires a different way of seeing connection. There is a quiet sadness that many people feel when a relationship begins to change. The mind immediately starts searching for explanations. It wonders what went wrong. It questions whether something could have been saved. But sometimes nothing went wrong. Sometimes a relationship simply completed the role it was meant to play. Buddhist philosophy often encourages people to observe nature closely because nature reveals how life truly works. When observing the natural world, it becomes clear that everything moves in cycles. Trees grow leaves in spring, flowers bloom during summer, autumn arrives and the leaves begin falling, winter follows and the branches rest quietly until the next season begins. None of these changes mean the tree has failed. They simply reflect the rhythm of life. Relationships often follow similar rhythms. Some connections appear during moments of growth. They help individuals develop new perspectives, overcome challenges, or discover strengths they did not know existed. During this time, the connection feels vibrant, conversations flow easily, both people feel energized by the relationship. It feels as if the connection could continue forever, but life continues moving. People evolve. Circumstances shift. New paths begin appearing. Gradually, the rhythm of the relationship may begin changing. Conversations become less frequent. Interests move in different directions. The emotional closeness that once defined the connection slowly softens. For many individuals, this stage creates confusion. They may believe that something must be repaired. They might attempt to restore the exact dynamic that once existed. They may feel guilty for noticing that the connection no longer feels the same. But Buddhist wisdom offers a gentler interpretation. Some relationships are seasonal. Just as certain flowers bloom only for a short period before returning to the soil, some connections exist only during specific chapters of life. These relationships do not lose their value simply because they end. In fact, their temporary nature often makes them even more meaningful. A seasonal relationship may appear during a difficult time and provide the support needed to move forward. Another connection may introduce ideas that change the direction of someone's life. Even if these individuals eventually move in different directions, the impact of that connection continues shaping their journey. The mind often struggles to accept this idea because attachment prefers permanence. Attachment tells people that if something is truly valuable, it should remain unchanged. It encourages them to preserve connections exactly as they once were. But life is not static. Every person continues growing and transforming. If two individuals grow in similar directions, their connection may continue evolving alongside them. If their paths begin diverging, the relationship may naturally reach its conclusion. This ending does not erase the beauty of what existed. It simply reflects the natural rhythm of growth. Many people resist this rhythm because they interpret endings as rejection. They may believe that if someone leaves their life, it means the connection was not real. But this belief misunderstands how relationships function. Two people can genuinely care for one another and still move in different directions over time. Their connection may have fulfilled an important role during a specific chapter of life. When that chapter ends, the relationship may quietly release itself. Understanding this idea allows individuals to experience relationships with greater presence. Instead of clinging to the fear of losing someone, they begin appreciating the time shared while it exists. They recognize that the value of a connection is not determined by how long it lasts, but by how deeply it influences growth. This perspective removes much of the anxiety that often surrounds relationships. People no longer feel pressured to force permanence. They become more attentive to the quality of the connection in the present moment. They listen more carefully. They speak more honestly. They appreciate the experiences shared together rather than worrying about how long the relationship will continue. This presence creates richer connections. Another important shift occurs as well. Individuals begin releasing the need to control how relationships evolve. They understand that growth cannot be forced and that connections cannot be preserved by sheer determination. Instead, they allow relationships to follow their natural course. If the connection continues nurturing both individuals, they welcome its presence. If the connection begins fading as life moves forward, they allow that transition to occur without resentment. This acceptance creates emotional freedom. The person no longer feels responsible for holding relationships together beyond their natural lifespan. They also stop blaming themselves when connections change. Instead of asking what they did wrong, they begin asking what the relationship taught them. Every meaningful connection leaves something behind. Sometimes it offers knowledge about personal boundaries. Sometimes it reveals new perspectives about life. Sometimes it simply provides comfort during a difficult period. These lessons remain even after the relationship ends. Buddhist teachings often emphasize gratitude as a way of honoring impermanent experiences. Gratitude acknowledges that something valuable existed without demanding that it continue forever. When someone practices gratitude for seasonal relationships, they transform the experience of loss. Instead of focusing on what has disappeared, they recognize what was gained. They remember the conversations that changed their thinking. They remember the moments of laughter or understanding that brought light to their lives. These memories become part of their personal story. Another aspect of seasonal relationships involves recognizing when it is time to release the connection gracefully. This recognition requires honesty. Sometimes people hold on to relationships long after both individuals have moved forward emotionally. They continue communicating out of habit rather than genuine connection. The conversations may feel forced. The energy that once defined the relationship may no longer be present. Letting go during this stage allows both people to follow their paths freely. This does not require dramatic endings or conflict. Often the transition happens quietly. Communication becomes less frequent. Life gradually leads each person toward new experiences. The connection remains as a respectful memory rather than an active presence. Accepting this natural transition prevents unnecessary tension. It allows individuals to maintain appreciation for the relationship without forcing it to remain unchanged. Over time, this understanding transforms how people approach connection itself. They stop viewing relationships as possessions that must be held tightly. Instead, they see them as shared experiences that evolve with time. Some connections will remain throughout life's many seasons. Others will appear briefly and then disappear once their purpose has been fulfilled. Both types hold value. The key is learning to recognize which kind of relationship is present and responding with awareness rather than attachment. When someone develops this awareness, their relationships become more peaceful. They no longer cling to people out of fear. They no longer interpret endings as failures. Instead, they move through life with openness to whatever connections appear. They welcome the people who walk beside them during certain chapters. And when those chapters close, they carry the lessons forward with gratitude rather than regret. In this way, seasonal relationships become part of life's natural rhythm. They arrive when needed. They offer what they are meant to offer. And when the season changes, they gently step aside so that new experiences can begin growing in the open space they leave behind. As the quiet wisdom of seasonal relationships begins settling into the mind, another subtle pattern often becomes visible. Even after people accept that certain connections belong to a specific chapter of life, the story does not always end there. The relationship may have finished in the external world, yet inside the mind, something continues moving. Old conversations return without warning. A sentence spoken months ago suddenly echoes again. Moments that once seemed finished appear in memory as if they are happening right now. The situation has ended, but the mind keeps reopening it. This experience is familiar to almost everyone. A person may be walking quietly, driving somewhere, or preparing to sleep when an old interaction suddenly rises into awareness. Words that were spoken long ago begin replaying again and again. The mind starts asking questions. What if something different had been said? Why did that moment unfold that way? What would have happened if the conversation had taken another direction? Even when there is nothing left to change, the mental replay continues. This pattern reveals one of the most fascinating aspects of the human mind. The body may leave a situation, but the mind often stays behind long after the event has ended. The memory becomes a kind of unfinished loop. The brain keeps revisiting the same moment as if it is still trying to solve something that was never fully resolved. The conversation becomes frozen in time, yet it continues living inside awareness. At first, this replay may appear harmless. The mind believes it is simply reflecting or thinking through the past. But when the same scene repeats many times, the emotional weight of that memory can begin shaping the present. Buddhist philosophy describes this pattern as a form of mental attachment. Even though the external relationship or event has ended, the mind continues feeding energy into the memory. Each time the moment is replayed, attention is given to something that no longer exists in the present. This attention becomes a form of emotional watering. Just as a plant grows when it receives water repeatedly, a memory grows stronger when it receives constant attention. The brain reinforces the emotional significance of that moment every time it is revisited. Eventually, the memory becomes more vivid than other experiences occurring right now. This process happens because the mind has a natural desire for closure. When something ends without clear resolution, the brain attempts to reconstruct the situation again and again, searching for answers. It replays conversations to examine every detail. Perhaps a different phrase would have changed the outcome. Perhaps a certain moment was misunderstood. Perhaps something important was left unsaid. The mind becomes a storyteller trying to rewrite history. But no matter how many times the memory is revisited, the past remains unchanged. This realization can feel frustrating because the mind believes it is working toward understanding, yet the repeated thinking rarely brings peace. Instead, it keeps emotional wounds fresh. Each replay pulls the individual back into the same emotional environment that existed during the original moment. The body may even react physically. The heart rate may increase, muscles may tighten. The brain cannot always distinguish between remembering an emotional event and experiencing it again. As a result, the person may feel as if they are reliving something that already ended long ago. Buddhist mindfulness offers a powerful approach to this pattern. Instead of trying to force the mind to stop thinking about the past, mindfulness encourages observing the mental process itself. The individual begins noticing when the replay starts. They recognize the moment when a memory appears and begins drawing attention into its story. Instead of becoming absorbed in the scene, they simply acknowledge it. A thought is appearing. A memory is rising. This simple recognition creates distance between the observer and the thought. Without awareness, the mind automatically follows the story wherever it leads. It becomes emotionally involved again, analyzing every detail as if the situation is still unfolding. With mindfulness, the person begins seeing the replay as a mental event rather than an objective reality. They notice how the mind constructs the story. They observe how emotions react to it. They see how the loop continues when attention feeds it. This awareness weakens the power of rumination. The mind gradually learns that replaying the same conversation repeatedly does not create resolution. Resolution arises from acceptance, when someone stops fighting the existence of the memory and simply observes it. The emotional charge surrounding that moment begins softening. The memory loses its urgency. Instead of demanding constant attention, it becomes just one experience among many within the flow of life. Another important insight emerges during this process. Many people believe that replaying the past helps them learn from mistakes. They fear that if they stop analyzing old conversations, they might repeat the same behavior in the future. But mindfulness reveals a different truth. Learning does not require endless rumination. True understanding arises when the mind calmly reflects on an experience once, recognizes the lesson, and then releases the emotional attachment to it. The repeated replay is not learning. It is the mind's attempt to control something that has already passed. Once the lesson has been seen, the story no longer needs constant attention. This realization brings relief. the person understands that growth does not depend on holding the past tightly. It depends on integrating insight and allowing life to continue unfolding. Mindfulness practices often involve returning attention to the present moment whenever the mind drifts into old narratives. This does not mean suppressing memories. It means gently redirecting awareness. When the replay begins, the person may notice their breathing. They may observe the sensations in their body. They may bring attention to the environment around them. These small shifts anchor awareness in the present rather than in mental reconstruction. Over time, this practice retrains the brain. The mind learns that memories can appear without requiring extended analysis. They become like clouds passing through the sky of awareness. They arise briefly, exist for a moment, and then dissolve naturally. This process restores emotional energy. When the mind is no longer consumed by replaying old conversations, it has more space for present experiences. Relationships that exist right now receive fuller attention. Creative thoughts begin appearing more freely. Even moments of silence feel calmer because the mind is not constantly revisiting unfinished stories. Another transformation occurs as well. The individual begins recognizing that many of the conversations replayed by the mind were never meant to be solved. Human interactions are complex. Words are sometimes misunderstood. Emotions influence how messages are delivered and received. Not every moment can be explained perfectly. Accepting this imperfection allows the mind to relax. The person realizes that some memories will remain incomplete. But incompleteness does not mean failure. It simply reflects the complexity of human experience. This acceptance removes the urgency to analyze every detail of the past. Instead of searching endlessly for the perfect interpretation, the individual allows the moment to remain part of their history without demanding resolution. Gradually, the emotional watering stops. The memory still exists, but it no longer grows stronger. Without repeated attention, it fades into the background of the mind. It becomes one of many experiences that shaped the person's journey, rather than a dominant story that defines it. In this way, mindfulness interrupts the cycle of rumination. It does not erase memories, it changes the relationship with them. Instead of living inside the past, the person becomes an observer of how the mind interacts with it. And through that observation, the endless replay of dead conversations slowly begins to quiet. What remains is not the noise of unfinished dialogue, but the calm presence of a mind learning to live fully in the moment that is actually unfolding now. As the mind gradually learns to stop replaying dead conversations, another hidden weight often becomes visible. The memories may quiet down, the emotional loops may soften, and the person may finally begin feeling the calm that follows letting go. Yet even after the past stops pulling attention backward, something else can still hold a person in place. It is not the memory of the relationship itself. It is the fear of how the decision to leave might be seen. A quiet worry begins appearing in the mind. The situation may have clearly stopped growing. The signs of stagnation may have been present for a long time. The person may already understand that continuing to invest energy will only create more exhaustion. But one thought continues lingering. What will people think? This question has more power than many individuals realize. Human beings naturally care about how they are perceived by others. Reputation, approval, and belonging have always played important roles in social life. From early childhood, people are taught that perseverance is a virtue. They hear stories that praise endurance. They are reminded that strong individuals never give up. Because of this cultural narrative, stepping away from something can feel uncomfortable. The mind immediately begins comparing the decision to the idea of quitting. It wonders whether leaving will be interpreted as weakness. It worries that others might assume the person lacked determination or patience. This fear can quietly trap individuals inside commitments that no longer support their growth. The situation itself may have already ended emotionally. The connection may have become stagnant. The environment may no longer encourage learning or development. But the individual stays because they do not want to be labeled as someone who gave up. This label carries deep emotional weight. No one wants to be remembered as the person who abandoned a responsibility or walked away when things became difficult. The desire to avoid this perception can become stronger than the desire for personal peace. Buddhist philosophy offers a powerful shift in perspective regarding this fear. It teaches that persistence is valuable only when it supports growth and awareness. Continuing an effort blindly, without examining whether that effort still serves a meaningful purpose, does not represent strength. It represents attachment. Attachment convinces the mind that endurance is always the correct choice. It encourages individuals to continue investing energy even when the situation clearly reveals that growth has stopped. But wisdom asks a different question. Is continuing truly beneficial? This question requires honest reflection. Sometimes persistence leads to transformation. Difficult challenges can strengthen resilience, deepen understanding, and bring new opportunities for learning. In those moments, staying committed makes sense. But there are other situations where persistence simply prolongs suffering. The environment may remain toxic. The relationship may continue repeating the same unhealthy patterns. The project may have lost its direction entirely. When growth disappears, persistence becomes something else. It becomes resistance to reality. Buddhist teachings emphasize discernment as a form of wisdom. Discernment involves observing a situation clearly without allowing fear or social expectations to distort perception. It asks individuals to examine whether their actions align with truth rather than reputation. This form of awareness often reveals that leaving a stagnant situation is not an act of quitting. It is an act of clarity. Discernment recognizes when a path has reached its natural conclusion. It acknowledges that continuing simply to maintain appearances does not create progress. The courage required to step away from such situations often goes unnoticed. Society celebrates those who endure visible challenges, but it rarely recognizes the quiet strength involved in releasing commitments that no longer support life. Walking away requires confronting several layers of fear. There is the fear of judgment from others. There is the fear of disappointing people who expected the person to continue. There is also the fear of uncertainty about what comes next. Each of these fears can create hesitation. But Buddhist wisdom encourages looking beyond the surface of these fears. Many of the judgments people imagine rarely occur as intensely as expected. Even when others do question a decision, their opinions often reflect their own beliefs rather than the reality of the situation. Every individual interprets persistence and withdrawal differently. One person may view stepping away as weakness. Another may see it as wisdom. Trying to control these interpretations is impossible. What remains within a person's control is their own clarity about why the decision was made. When someone understands that a commitment has stopped supporting growth, they begin seeing their choice differently. Instead of feeling ashamed for leaving, they recognize that staying would have meant ignoring what they already knew. This understanding strengthens self-trust. Self-trust is an essential part of emotional maturity. It allows individuals to rely on their awareness rather than constantly seeking validation from external opinions. Without self-trust, people become dependent on approval. They continue situations simply because others expect them to. They measure success based on how their decisions appear rather than whether those decisions align with truth. Buddhist philosophy encourages releasing this dependence. It teaches that clarity comes from within, not from the approval of the crowd. When individuals listen carefully to their own awareness, they begin recognizing when a path is no longer alive. They notice the absence of growth. They observe the emotional fatigue that arises from continuing without purpose. Instead of interpreting these signals as weakness, they begin understanding them as guidance. These signals indicate that life is inviting change. Another reason people fear being seen as the one who quit involves identity. Many individuals build their sense of self around the idea of being dependable or resilient. They take pride in their ability to remain committed, even when circumstances become difficult. This identity can become so strong that letting go feels like betraying who they believe they are. But identity, like everything else, evolves. A person who once needed to prove their endurance may eventually reach a stage where wisdom replaces that need. They may discover that strength includes the ability to recognize when persistence becomes unnecessary. This transformation does not erase their past commitment. It simply reflects growth. Someone who leaves a stagnant situation after years of effort has not failed. They have completed a chapter. Understanding this difference allows individuals to release the emotional weight associated with quitting. Instead of framing their decision as abandonment, they begin viewing it as graduation from an experience that has already taught everything it could offer. Another powerful insight emerges during this stage. The fear of being judged often exists more strongly inside the mind than in the outside world. People imagine conversations where others criticize their choice. They picture themselves being questioned about why they left. But in reality, most individuals remain focused on their own lives. The imagined audience watching every decision rarely exists. Realizing this truth can feel liberating. It reminds the person that their path does not need to satisfy everyone's expectations. Their responsibility is to move through life with honesty and awareness. If a commitment still supports growth, continuing makes sense. If a commitment has clearly ended its role, releasing it becomes an act of courage. This courage does not require dramatic announcements or conflict. Often the most powerful decisions happen quietly. A person simply acknowledges the truth within themselves and chooses a new direction. They do not need to justify their choice to everyone around them. Their peace becomes the confirmation that the decision was correct. Over time, individuals who develop this clarity begin noticing how many opportunities appear once they release stagnant commitments. Energy that was previously consumed by maintaining a dead situation becomes available again. New interests begin forming, new connections appear, ideas that were once ignored start receiving attention. Life begins moving again. This movement reveals an important lesson. Letting go is not the end of the journey, it is the beginning of a new one. The courage required to step away from what no longer grows creates space for experiences that align with the person's current path. Instead of being trapped inside a commitment that belongs to the past, they become free to explore the future. And as this freedom expands, the fear of being seen as the one who quit gradually disappears. What remains is the quiet confidence of someone who understands that discernment is not weakness, it is wisdom. And wisdom always knows when it is time to continue forward, and when it is time to release what no longer belongs on the path ahead. As the fear of being seen as the one who quit begins to fade, another deeper realization slowly rises into awareness. The person may finally understand that walking away from what no longer grows is not weakness. They may feel lighter after releasing commitments that had quietly drained their energy for years. Yet even after this clarity appears, one final obstacle often remains hidden in the mind. It is the quiet voice that says, "But I have already given so much. Time has been invested. Effort has been poured into the situation. Emotions, patience, loyalty, and love have all been spent trying to make something work." Because of this history, the mind begins telling a familiar story. Stopping now would waste everything that has already been given. This thought feels powerful because human beings naturally value the things they invest in. When someone spends years building a relationship, pursuing a career, or trying to repair a broken situation, the effort becomes part of their identity. Walking away from that investment can feel like erasing a portion of their life. But Buddhist wisdom invites a different way of looking at this struggle. The past cannot be recovered, no matter how much effort was given. What has already been spent is complete. The only real question that remains is whether continuing the investment will bring growth into the future. This insight challenges one of the most common psychological traps people experience. The mind often believes that the value of a situation increases simply because more energy has been placed into it. The longer someone remains committed, the harder it becomes to leave. This pattern appears in many areas of life. A person may remain inside a relationship that no longer supports emotional growth because they remember the years they spent nurturing it. Someone may continue working in an environment that drains their creativity because they invested so much time building their career there. Even small decisions follow this pattern. A person may continue reading a book they no longer enjoy simply because they have already finished half of it. They may continue watching a film they dislike because they already spent time starting it. The mind feels uncomfortable abandoning something once effort has been given. This discomfort comes from a belief that stopping would invalidate the investment. But Buddhist philosophy gently reveals that this belief is based on misunderstanding. The past does not disappear when someone changes direction. Every experience contributes to learning and growth, regardless of whether the situation continues. If a person spends years in a relationship that eventually ends, those years were not meaningless. They provided lessons about communication, boundaries, emotional awareness, and connection. The value of those lessons remains even after the relationship ends. Continuing to stay in a stagnant situation does not increase the value of the past investment. It simply extends the period of stagnation. Understanding this distinction requires awareness. The mind tends to measure success by how long something lasts. It often assumes that persistence automatically proves that a decision was correct. But life does not operate according to this simple equation. Sometimes the most intelligent decision is recognizing when the conditions that once made something meaningful have changed. When a person becomes aware of this shift, they face an important moment of choice. They can continue investing energy simply to justify what has already been spent. Or they can acknowledge that the past investment has already fulfilled its purpose. This second option often feels difficult because it requires letting go of the illusion that more effort will eventually restore what once existed. But Buddhism teaches that clinging to the past prevents the mind from responding to the present. The present moment contains its own reality. If growth is no longer occurring, awareness must recognize that truth. Continuing the same effort out of habit will not transform stagnation into progress. This is where emotional investment bias becomes visible. The mind attaches meaning to the time already spent rather than evaluating the current situation honestly. It says, "I cannot leave now because I have already come this far." But this reasoning ignores a deeper question. Where does the path lead from here? A person may have invested years walking down a road that once seemed promising. But if that road eventually leads to a dead end, continuing to walk further will not create a new destination. It will simply extend the journey in the wrong direction. Buddhist mindfulness encourages individuals to observe this pattern carefully. Instead of focusing on the amount of energy invested in the past, the person learns to ask whether continuing will create new life in the future. This shift in perspective transforms decision-making. The individual begins evaluating situations based on their present reality rather than their historical investment. They recognize that every moment offers a new opportunity to choose wisely. Another powerful insight begins to emerge during this process. Past investment does not belong to the future. The time that was spent, the effort that was given, and the emotions that were experienced are all part of a completed chapter. Nothing that happens today can return those moments or alter their meaning. But continuing to invest in a stagnant situation can influence the future. It can extend frustration, delay growth, and prevent new opportunities from appearing. Understanding this truth creates freedom. The person no longer feels obligated to remain in a situation simply because of what happened before. They begin recognizing that life moves forward, not backward. Every new decision shapes what comes next. This awareness does not erase appreciation for what was once built. Instead, it allows individuals to honor the past without becoming trapped inside it. They may still feel gratitude for the time they spent learning from a particular experience. They may recognize how that investment shaped their understanding of themselves and others. But they no longer believe that continuing the same path is necessary to justify that history. Another transformation appears as well. The individual begins trusting that new investments will always be possible. Attachment to past effort often arises from the fear that nothing equally meaningful will appear again. The mind worries that leaving a familiar situation will create emptiness or regret. But Buddhist philosophy reminds people that life is constantly evolving. New experiences, connections, and opportunities emerge naturally when space exists for them. Holding tightly to past investments often prevents these new possibilities from appearing. It occupies emotional and mental energy that could otherwise be directed toward growth. When someone releases this attachment, they regain the freedom to explore new directions. They discover that the value of their life is not determined by how long they remained in one situation. It is shaped by their willingness to continue learning and evolving. Over time, this understanding dissolves the pressure to justify past decisions. The individual stops asking whether leaving means their earlier effort was wasted. Instead, they begin asking whether continuing would create genuine growth now. This question brings clarity. If the situation still encourages learning, connection, and development, staying may be meaningful. If the situation has become stagnant, releasing it becomes an act of awareness. In this way, emotional investment bias slowly loses its influence. The person becomes less attached to what has already been spent and more attentive to what lies ahead. Each decision becomes an opportunity to align with truth rather than habit. They begin seeing life as a series of evolving chapters rather than a single commitment that must remain unchanged forever. This perspective creates a sense of liberation. The past remains part of their story, but it no longer dictates the direction of the future. Every step forward becomes guided by awareness instead of obligation. And through that awareness, individuals discover a deeper form of freedom. The freedom to honor what once existed while still choosing a path that allows new growth to emerge. As the grip of emotional investment bias begins loosening, the mind starts seeing situations with clearer eyes. Instead of being pulled backward by what has already been spent, awareness turns towards something more immediate. The person begins noticing what the present moment actually feels like. The attention slowly shifts from history to energy, and this shift reveals something subtle that many people once overlooked. Every situation carries a certain kind of energy. Some environments feel light, alive, and open. Conversations move naturally. Ideas expand. There is curiosity, movement, and the quiet sense that something meaningful is unfolding. In these moments, even effort feels nourishing because growth is taking place. But other situations carry a different feeling entirely. The atmosphere becomes heavy. Conversations repeat themselves without producing change. Efforts feel forced rather than natural. Instead of feeling energized after interacting with the situation, a person often feels drained. This contrast between flowing energy and stagnant energy becomes one of the most important signals a person can learn to observe. Buddhist awareness often encourages people to pay attention not only to what is happening, but to how it feels in the deeper layers of experience. Beneath words, beneath actions, there is always an underlying movement of energy shaping the situation. When something is healthy and evolving, the energy tends to move. Movement does not always mean excitement or constant activity. Sometimes it appears as quiet growth. A conversation leads to a new understanding. A challenge creates an opportunity to learn something different. Two people communicate and slowly adjust their perspectives. Even when difficulties arise, there is still a sense of forward motion. But when something has stopped growing, that movement begins disappearing. The same discussions repeat again and again without resolution. The same emotional patterns appear regardless of how many times someone tries to improve the situation. The same effort produces the same outcome each time. This repetition is one of the clearest signals of energetic stagnation. Instead of feeling like a living process, the situation begins feeling like a loop. The mind may attempt to interpret this loop as a temporary challenge. It may believe that persistence will eventually create a breakthrough. Sometimes this belief is true. Certain situations require patience before change becomes visible. But when stagnation continues for a long period without any genuine movement, the energy of the situation begins communicating something important. It is saying that growth has paused. Learning to recognize this energetic message requires attention. Many people become so focused on solving problems that they stop observing the environment surrounding the problem. They analyze details, search for strategies, and continue investing effort, but they rarely step back to notice the overall pattern. Buddhist mindfulness invites individuals to step back. Instead of becoming lost in constant activity, they begin observing the quality of the situation itself. They ask quiet questions. Does this environment encourage clarity or confusion? Do conversations create understanding or simply repeat old frustrations? Does effort lead to progress, or does it return to the same starting point every time? These questions shift awareness toward the energetic flow of the experience. Sometimes the answers appear immediately. A person may suddenly realize that a particular relationship has not evolved in years. The same misunderstandings continue appearing. Attempts to improve communication lead back to identical arguments. In other cases, the realization emerges more gradually. The person begins noticing how their body responds to certain environments. Before entering a conversation, they may already feel tension forming in their chest or stomach. They may sense fatigue before the interaction even begins. These physical signals are not random. The body often detects energetic patterns before the conscious mind fully understands them. If someone repeatedly leaves an interaction feeling drained, discouraged, or emotionally heavy, that sensation becomes valuable information. It suggests that the situation may no longer support growth. This awareness does not require immediate judgment. The purpose of observing energy is not to criticize others or assign blame. Every situation contains many influences, including personal histories, expectations, and circumstances beyond anyone's control. But recognizing the energetic pattern allows individuals to respond wisely. When energy flows, participation feels natural. When energy stagnates, effort begins feeling forced. The difference between these two experiences becomes clear with practice. Another important aspect of energetic awareness involves noticing how creativity behaves within a situation. When growth exists, new ideas often appear spontaneously. Conversations introduce fresh perspectives. Even disagreements can lead to deeper understanding because both individuals remain open to learning. But when energy stagnates, creativity fades. The same viewpoints repeat endlessly. Suggestions for improvement are ignored or dismissed. Instead of curiosity, the atmosphere becomes defensive. In these environments, people often stop exploring possibilities. They become trapped inside rigid patterns of thinking. Buddhist awareness encourages observing these shifts without immediately reacting. The goal is not to escape every difficult situation at the first sign of discomfort. Challenges can still exist within environments that support growth. The key difference lies in whether movement is present. In healthy situations, challenges lead somewhere. They reveal new insights, strengthen resilience, or deepen connection. In stagnant situations, challenges simply repeat. They drain energy without creating transformation. Recognizing this distinction allows individuals to make decisions based on clarity rather than habit. Many people remain in stagnant environments because they assume the heaviness they feel is their personal failure. They believe they are not trying hard enough, not communicating well enough, or not being patient enough. But sometimes the heaviness does not come from personal inadequacy. It comes from the natural conclusion of a particular situation. Just as a season eventually ends in nature, certain environments eventually reach a point where they can no longer evolve. When this happens, the energy becomes dense. Everything begins feeling more difficult than it once did. Conversations require more effort. Motivation becomes harder to maintain. The sense of possibility that once existed slowly disappears. This energetic shift is not meant to punish anyone. It simply signals that life is moving in a different direction. Buddhist teachings often emphasize impermanence. Nothing remains fixed forever. Situations that once felt vibrant may eventually lose their vitality. When individuals learn to read these signals, they begin responding with greater wisdom. Instead of forcing energy into something that no longer grows, they acknowledge what the situation is communicating. This acknowledgement creates space for new possibilities. The moment someone stops fighting stagnation, they regain the energy that was previously consumed by trying to revive it. That energy becomes available again for exploration, creativity, and connection with experiences that still carry movement. Over time, the practice of reading energetic signals becomes intuitive. A person begins sensing when something feels aligned with growth and when it feels heavy with repetition. They trust the subtle guidance provided by these sensations. This trust does not eliminate uncertainty from life, but it creates a deeper relationship with awareness. Instead of blindly pushing forward through every situation, the individual learns to listen carefully to what life is revealing. Sometimes the message encourages patience. Other times it gently suggests that the chapter has reached its natural ending. In both cases, the ability to read the energy of a situation becomes a powerful guide. It protects individuals from investing endless effort into stagnant patterns. It helps them recognize environments where growth still exists. And most importantly, it reminds them that life is always communicating through subtle signals. When those signals are noticed with awareness, the path forward becomes much clearer. When a person begins learning to read the energy of a situation, something becomes clear that once felt confusing. They start recognizing when life is quietly signaling that a chapter has reached its natural end. The conversations have grown heavy. The patterns have become repetitive. The sense of movement has faded. Awareness sees the truth long before the heart fully accepts it. Even when the mind understands that letting go is necessary, another emotion often appears that people rarely talk about. It is not anger. It is not regret. It is a quiet sadness. There is a particular kind of grief that arrives when something must end, even though it once meant a great deal. This sadness does not always come with dramatic tears or visible suffering. Sometimes it moves through the heart silently, like a soft shadow passing across the mind. A person may wake up one morning and realize that the chapter is truly finished. The decision to let go may already have been made. The energy of the situation may have clearly stopped flowing, yet the heart still remembers what once existed. Memories of laughter, conversations, shared struggles, and meaningful moments remain alive. These memories do not disappear simply because the relationship, environment, or path has reached its conclusion. This is where silent grief begins. Many people struggle with this stage because society rarely acknowledges it openly. In many cultures, there is an unspoken expectation that if a decision to leave was necessary, then the person should feel relief rather than sadness. Others may say things like, "It was the right choice," or "You will be better off now." While these statements may be true, they often overlook something important. Right choices can still carry grief. A person can know with certainty that an ending was necessary and still feel sorrow for what has passed. This sorrow does not mean the decision was wrong. It simply means the heart recognizes the significance of what once existed. Buddhist wisdom offers a gentle perspective on this experience. Instead of resisting grief or trying to remove it quickly, Buddhist teachings allow space for it. Grief is not treated as an obstacle. It is seen as part of the healing process. When something meaningful ends, the mind naturally needs time to adjust. For a long period, the situation may have been part of daily life. Thoughts, routines, and emotions were shaped around its presence. When that presence disappears, the mind must reorganize itself. This adjustment can create a sense of emptiness or quiet loss. Many individuals attempt to avoid this feeling by distracting themselves immediately. They fill their schedule with new activities. They seek constant stimulation or rush toward the next chapter of life. But when grief is ignored, it often returns in subtle ways. Memories may suddenly appear during quiet moments. Emotional tension may surface without a clear reason. The mind may continue revisiting the past, trying to process feelings that were never fully acknowledged. Buddhist awareness encourages a different approach. Instead of running from grief, the person learns to sit with it gently. They allow themselves to feel the sadness without turning it into attachment. This distinction is important. Attachment tries to pull the mind back into the past. It asks questions about what could have been done differently. It imagines alternate outcomes and holds on to the hope that the past might somehow return. Grief, on the other hand, simply acknowledges what has ended. It recognizes that something valuable existed and that its absence now creates space. This recognition does not require clinging. It allows the heart to honor the memory without trying to revive it. When someone allows grief to exist without resistance, it begins transforming. At first, the sadness may feel heavy. Certain memories may bring a quiet ache. Familiar places or songs may remind the person of the connection that once existed. But slowly, something begins changing. The emotional weight softens. Memories that once created pain start carrying a different feeling. Instead of triggering regret, they begin revealing the beauty that was once shared. A person may remember a moment of laughter or understanding and feel gratitude rather than sorrow. This shift marks the beginning of healing. Grief has fulfilled its role. It has allowed the heart to process the significance of the ending without becoming trapped in it. Another aspect of silent grief involves recognizing how deeply the experience shaped personal growth. Every meaningful connection changes the individuals involved in some way. Even relationships that eventually end often leave behind important lessons. Someone may have learned how to communicate more openly. They may have discovered strengths they did not realize they possessed. They may have gained insight into their own boundaries, values, and emotional needs. These lessons remain long after the connection itself has ended. When grief is allowed to move naturally through awareness, the mind begins noticing these gifts. Instead of viewing the ending as a loss alone, the person begins seeing it as a transformation. What once felt like something taken away gradually appears as something that contributed to their evolution. Buddhist teachings often describe life as a series of changing conditions. Nothing remains the same forever. People enter each other's lives for different periods, offering experiences that shape understanding. Some relationships remain throughout many chapters. Others appear briefly and then dissolve once their purpose has been fulfilled. Both forms hold meaning. Grief arises when the heart acknowledges that something meaningful has completed its cycle, but acknowledging the end does not erase the value of the journey. It simply marks the transition into a new phase of life. During this phase, the individual may begin rediscovering themselves in ways that were not possible before. When a significant relationship or commitment ends, a certain amount of emotional space becomes available again. This space may feel unfamiliar at first. For a long time, attention may have been focused on maintaining the connection. Thoughts, decisions, and emotions may have revolved around it. Now that it is gone, the person begins asking new questions. Who am I without this chapter? What direction feels authentic now? These questions signal growth. The sadness of the ending becomes part of the foundation for future awareness. Instead of closing the heart, grief can actually deepen compassion. A person who has experienced silent endings often develops greater understanding for the emotional journeys of others. They recognize how complex human relationships can be. They become less judgmental about endings and more attentive to the quiet struggles people carry. This compassion becomes a form of wisdom. It allows individuals to move through life with greater sensitivity toward both themselves and others. Over time, the silent grief of necessary endings transforms into something peaceful. The sadness does not disappear entirely, but it no longer dominates the heart. It becomes a gentle reminder of a chapter that once mattered. Instead of pain, there is appreciation. Instead of longing, there is acceptance. The person understands that the ending was part of a larger journey. Without it, the growth that followed might never have appeared. In this way, grief becomes a bridge. It connects the past to the future without trapping the mind inside either one. The heart carries the memory of what once existed, but it remains open to whatever life will reveal next. And through that openness, healing continues unfolding quietly, one moment at a time. As the quiet grief of necessary endings begins settling into the heart, another subtle change slowly appears within the mind. The sadness softens, the memories remain, but they no longer hold the same weight. Something inside becomes quieter, more spacious, as if the emotional storms that once filled the inner world have slowly moved away. In that quiet space, a surprising realization often begins to emerge. A large part of the suffering that once existed was not only caused by the situation itself, it was also sustained by where the mind kept placing its attention. Long after something stopped growing, attention continued feeding it. Thoughts returned to it repeatedly. Energy was directed toward it again and again. The mind kept watering the same ground, even though the soil had already gone dry. And when this becomes visible, something powerful begins to happen. A person realizes that attention itself may be the most valuable resource they possess. There is a quiet moment that many people experience after letting go of something significant. It often happens unexpectedly. The mind notices how much mental space suddenly feels available. The constant thinking about the situation fades. The emotional tension that once occupied the background of daily life begins disappearing. It becomes clear that for a long time, a large portion of attention had been invested in something that could no longer grow. This discovery can feel both surprising and liberating. Attention is one of the most powerful forces shaping human experience. Wherever the mind places its focus, that area of life begins expanding in importance. Thoughts grow stronger when they receive repeated attention. Emotions intensify when the mind continues returning to the same story. In many ways, attention functions like water. When water flows into fertile soil, growth appears. Seeds begin sprouting. Life emerges naturally. But when water continues pouring onto land that can no longer produce anything, the effort becomes wasteful. The same principle applies to mental focus. When attention is directed toward situations that nurture learning, creativity, and connection, the mind becomes energized. Ideas flourish. Relationships deepen. Personal growth becomes possible. But when attention remains fixed on situations that have already ended or stopped evolving, the mind slowly becomes exhausted. It replays old memories. It analyzes past conversations. it continues feeding emotional patterns that belong to a previous chapter. Without realizing it, people often spend enormous amounts of mental energy watering what no longer grows. Buddhist meditation practices place great importance on understanding the nature of attention. Rather than treating thoughts as something uncontrollable, these teachings encourage individuals to observe how the mind moves. Through simple awareness, people begin noticing where their attention travels throughout the day. They observe how quickly the mind returns to certain memories. They see how easily thoughts about past conflicts or unresolved situations capture focus. At first, this observation can feel surprising. Many individuals assume they are thinking consciously, but meditation reveals that attention often moves automatically. The mind follows familiar emotional paths without being intentionally directed. These paths are formed through repetition. If someone spent months or years thinking about a particular situation, the mind becomes accustomed to returning there. The emotional story becomes deeply ingrained. Even after the external situation has ended, attention may continue flowing toward it out of habit. Meditation helps interrupt this automatic movement. When a person sits quietly and observes their thoughts, they begin recognizing how attention shifts from one subject to another. A memory appears, an emotion arises, the mind begins following the story connected to it, but instead of becoming absorbed in the narrative, the individual simply notices it. They recognize that attention has moved. This recognition creates a small but powerful moment of choice. Instead of allowing attention to remain trapped in the same pattern, the person gently guides it back to the present moment. They return to the breath. They notice physical sensations. They observe the sounds around them. At first, this process may feel difficult. The mind is accustomed to following its usual pathways. It may return repeatedly to the same memory or emotional loop. But with patience, something begins changing. The individual realizes that attention does not have to remain attached to every thought that appears. A thought can arise without receiving continuous focus. An emotion can pass through awareness without becoming the center of the mind's activity. This discovery restores a sense of inner freedom. Instead of being pulled automatically toward past experiences, the person begins directing their attention intentionally. They choose where their energy flows, and this choice transforms the entire landscape of the mind. When attention is reclaimed from situations that no longer grow, mental clarity begins returning. The constant background noise of unresolved stories fades. The mind becomes less crowded with thoughts that belong to the past. This quietness allows new forms of awareness to emerge. Creativity often appears in these moments. Ideas that were previously hidden beneath layers of emotional rumination begin surfacing naturally. The person may notice new interests developing. They may feel inspired to explore activities that once felt distant or impossible. Attention becomes available for discovery again. Relationships in the present moment also change. When the mind is not constantly distracted by old stories, individuals become more present with the people around them. Conversations deepen, listening becomes more attentive. Instead of carrying the weight of the past into every interaction, the person begins meeting others with fresh awareness. This presence strengthens connection. Another transformation occurs internally as well. When attention returns to the present, the mind becomes calmer. Anxiety often arises from imagining future problems or replaying past events. Without these constant mental projections, the nervous system begins relaxing, breathing becomes slower, thoughts move more gently. Peace begins appearing not because life has become perfect, but because attention is no longer trapped in endless mental loops. Buddhist teachings often describe this shift as returning home to the present moment. The present moment is the only place where life is actually unfolding. Yet many individuals spend most of their mental energy revisiting what has already passed or anticipating what has not yet arrived. Reclaiming attention means returning to where life truly exists. In the present moment, simple experiences become meaningful again. The warmth of sunlight on the skin, the rhythm of breathing, the sound of wind moving through trees. These small details often go unnoticed when the mind is occupied with unresolved stories. But when attention becomes available again, the richness of ordinary life begins revealing itself. This awareness does not require dramatic change. It grows quietly through consistent practice. Each time a person notices their attention drifting toward a stagnant situation and gently redirects it, they strengthen their ability to remain present. Each time they choose curiosity about the current moment instead of replaying an old story, the mind becomes more balanced. Over time, this practice transforms how attention behaves. Instead of being captured automatically by familiar emotional patterns, attention becomes flexible. It flows toward experiences that support growth, creativity, and connection. The individual no longer feels obligated to keep watering what has already stopped growing. They recognize that their attention is precious. Wherever it goes, life begins forming around it. By reclaiming this resource, they reclaim their peace. And in that reclaimed attention, something remarkable begins to unfold. Clarity returns, energy returns, and the quiet beauty of the present moment becomes visible once again. As attention slowly returns to the present moment, something powerful begins happening inside the mind. The endless loops of thought begin quieting. Energy that was once scattered across old memories starts gathering again in the here and now. Clarity appears where confusion once lived. Yet even when someone has reclaimed their attention, one lingering question often remains. Why did it end the way it did? For many people, this question becomes one of the most difficult parts of letting go. The relationship ended, the opportunity disappeared, or the situation simply dissolved without warning. There was no final explanation, no clear resolution, no conversation that fully explained what happened. One day the door was open, and then suddenly it was closed. This kind of ending creates a particular kind of discomfort inside the human mind. People naturally want stories to make sense. They want events to follow a clear cause and effect. When something meaningful ends without explanation, the mind begins searching for answers. It starts reviewing every moment leading up to the ending. Perhaps something important was missed. Perhaps a conversation should have been handled differently. Perhaps there was a sign that went unnoticed. The mind begins building theories. It analyzes words that were spoken. It revisits memories again and again. It tries to assemble the pieces of the story until everything fits together in a logical way. But sometimes the explanation never arrives. The other person may never offer clarity. Circumstances may change so quickly that understanding becomes impossible. Life may simply move forward without providing the answers the mind wants. When this happens, the search for closure can become its own form of attachment. Instead of releasing the situation, the person becomes emotionally tied to the mystery surrounding it. The unanswered questions keep the mind returning to the past. Each attempt to solve the puzzle pulls attention back toward the same stagnant ground. Buddhist teachings offer a deeply compassionate perspective on this experience. They remind individuals that life does not always provide complete narratives. Some doors close without explanation because the conditions that created them have simply ended. The people involved may not fully understand the reasons themselves. External circumstances may have shifted in ways that cannot be easily explained. In these moments, searching endlessly for a perfect answer often prolongs suffering rather than relieving it. The mind becomes trapped in a cycle of speculation. One explanation leads to another possibility. Each theory creates new questions. The person may spend months or even years trying to understand something that cannot be fully understood. Meanwhile, life continues unfolding in the present. Buddhist awareness gently invites individuals to consider a different approach. Instead of demanding a complete explanation, the person begins practicing acceptance of incomplete stories. This does not mean ignoring the situation or pretending it never mattered. It means acknowledging that some chapters of life end without clear conclusions. Just as a book may occasionally contain a story that finishes abruptly, human experiences sometimes leave questions unanswered. Learning to live peacefully with these unanswered questions becomes part of emotional maturity. At first, this idea may feel uncomfortable. The mind prefers certainty. It wants to know exactly why something ended so it can place the event neatly within its understanding of the world. But life rarely operates with such neat explanations. Human emotions are complex. People make decisions based on many factors that may not always be visible to others. Sometimes individuals leave situations because they themselves are confused or struggling internally. Sometimes circumstances change in ways that prevent closure from occurring. Sometimes the truth simply remains unknown. Accepting this uncertainty requires patience. The person must allow the unanswered questions to exist without constantly trying to solve them. Instead of filling the silence with speculation, they begin observing the space that the unanswered story creates. In that space, something surprising often appears. Peace begins forming, not because the mystery has been solved, but because the mind has stopped fighting the absence of explanation. This shift becomes easier when someone recognizes that closure does not always come from the outside. Often closure arises from within. When a person accepts that an ending occurred, even without understanding every detail, the emotional attachment to the mystery begins loosening. The mind no longer needs to replay the past endlessly. It recognizes that the situation has completed its role in the story of life. Another important insight emerges during this process. Sometimes the search for explanation is actually a search for reassurance. The mind wants confirmation that the ending was not caused by personal failure. It wants evidence that the person did not do something wrong. But human relationships and experiences rarely depend on a single cause. Many endings happen because two people simply reach different stages of life. Their paths begin moving in separate directions. What once connected them strongly may no longer align with their current growth. This divergence does not require blame. It simply reflects the evolving nature of life. When someone understands this, the need to find a precise explanation begins fading. They realize that not every ending needs to be justified by a specific mistake or event. Sometimes the ending itself is the only truth available. Another benefit of accepting incomplete narratives is that it prevents the mind from becoming trapped in endless emotional analysis. Instead of continuing to revisit the same memories, attention becomes available for new experiences. The person begins noticing opportunities that were previously hidden behind the search for answers. Conversations with new people feel more open. Creative ideas begin emerging. The present moment regains its importance. The past no longer dominates the mind's attention. This transformation does not erase the memory of what happened. The relationship or situation remains part of the person's life story, but the absence of explanation no longer controls their emotional state. They carry the experience forward without demanding that it make perfect sense. Buddhist philosophy often emphasizes that life contains both clarity and mystery. Certain experiences will reveal their meaning over time, others will remain unresolved. The challenge is learning how to move forward peacefully, regardless of which type of experience occurs. When someone practices this acceptance, they develop greater resilience. They become less dependent on external closure to feel complete. They trust that life will continue unfolding, even when some chapters remain unfinished. This trust allows the heart to release its grip on unanswered questions. Instead of holding the door open for explanations that may never arrive, the person gently closes it themselves. They acknowledge that the story ended without the clarity they hoped for, and then they turn their attention back toward the path ahead. In doing so, they discover that closure is not always something that is given. Sometimes it is something that is quietly created through acceptance. Through that acceptance, the mind finally becomes free to stop searching the past for answers and begin experiencing the present moment fully once again. There comes a moment in every life when a quiet truth begins to surface. Not everything that once mattered is meant to continue forever. Some relationships complete their purpose. Some paths stop growing. Some doors close without explanation, and yet the mind keeps watering the same ground, hoping something new will rise from soil that has already given everything it could. Buddhist wisdom reminds us of something simple but powerful. Life grows where attention flows. When we keep pouring energy into situations that have stopped evolving, we slowly drain the peace and clarity meant for the present moment. But the moment we learn to release what no longer grows, something remarkable begins to happen. The mind becomes lighter, the heart becomes quieter. Space appears for new growth, new understanding, and new life. Letting go does not erase the past, it honors it. Every chapter, every relationship, every effort offered its own lesson. Some taught patience, some revealed truth. Some showed us where our strength truly lives. The wisdom is not in forcing those chapters to remain open forever. The wisdom is knowing when the season has changed. And when that understanding arrives, a powerful freedom emerges. The freedom to reclaim your attention, the freedom to stop fighting endings that were always part of life's rhythm. The freedom to water the parts of your life that are still alive and growing. Now take a moment and reflect quietly. What in your life has already stopped growing, but you keep watering anyway? Leave a comment below and share your thoughts. Your story might help someone else recognize their own moment of letting go. And if these teachings resonate with you, subscribe to the channel and join a community that is learning to live with clarity,